City Council. So for anybody who might be listening, if you're not familiar, our procedures on our work session nights are a little bit more informal. We generally don't make decisions. It's more of opportunity for discussion, with the exception that we can make direction to staff. So if anybody doesn't have one, there's a copy of the agenda back on the chart there. We've got 3 items on our agenda tonight. Before we jump into that, though, we will begin with public comment on any item. We will have an opportunity for public comment on the 3 agenda items later, but if you've got to leave or if you've got something that's not on our agenda tonight, please come forward. And we just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address.
I just kind of have a question, hoping someone can get back to me. I kind of spoke with Ms. Kinner about it. The public nuisance ordinance, how does it work? How does it go into effect? When you have people from the nuisance house coming on your property regularly, scaring the crap out of your daughter, and your kids in the house have to constantly be worried. How does this public nuisance thing work? Because we need to figure out something, because someone's going to get hurt. And it's probably not going to be anyone in my family, and they're going to get in trouble. But when we constantly have people coming on our property to find out where 824 is, if we know Robert Andrew Morris, all that, it's going to cause a problem. Luckily, John's really held his composure and didn't hit someone in the face yesterday for walking up, once again, trying to go into our mailbox looking for whatever package his wife put in the mailbox for him to pick up. So how does public nuisance work? When do they get targeted? We have proof, it's on video. So how do we go about getting something against the person who's causing all this problem?
Thank you very much. When we're done with public comment, we can partly address that. Next.
So I've sat there a few nights and I've watched this testimony from these people.
Sorry.
Go ahead. So I've watched the city council meetings and I've seen the testimony from these people that just spoke about this, is it Dorothy Lane or something? Unless you've lived it, I've got a lot of sympathy for those people. I'll guarantee you, I'd be surprised. We had the drug dealer live across our street for 4 years. You ever been jolted out of bed at 6 in the morning with a flashbang going off in the neighbor's house? Probably not. We did. Twice. Here comes the bear, and all the police and the ATF and you name it, every checkbox, every agency. They come down the street. They go break into the house, bring out the little brown paper bags, put them in the car. The day they did the flashbang, the guy comes out of the house that's selling the drugs. He gets in his car and drives down to the convenience store, gets a cup of coffee and comes back. While they're down there, he just sits there. Pretty soon the cops just all leave. You know how we got rid of them? They died. Because these people are in for a long haul. Because there is no sympathy. It isn't just Billings police. It's feds. Whole gamut. They don't give a damn about the neighborhood when they're selling drugs, I'll guarantee you. Because we went through it. We had this, I want to be correct here. I was going to use, and I better not, because last time I said something, well, she's not here anymore. There's this woman, fed. Oh, she's on the radio once in a while. She even spoke one night with Scott Tweedo. Oh, how she's gonna fix the world. They go down there, arrest this guy, and next thing we know, she goes, well, the paperwork got screwed up at a few agencies. We can't do anything on this one. Then we waited again. Sure enough, here come the bear down the street some 6 o'clock in the morning. They raid the house again. To this day, not one of them ever went to jail. Not one of them was ever charged with a crime. Never. So these people that live in these neighborhoods that have to put up with this, it is sad that they have to endure this because they think they're going to come in here and something's magically going to happen. Well, nothing's magically happening, at least in our situation, because we lived with it for 4 years. You could count. Here come the car from Wyoming, Butte, or Helena. They'd show up, and then for the next week, they'd line up in the middle of the street 4 deep, 4 o'clock in the morning, in the house for 15 minutes and leave. I wonder what the hell they're doing, all these cars for 15 minutes in the middle of the night for the next week. Oh, it's hard to believe. Or then they would go down to the Family Dollar with the backpacks and they'd get in the Harden 22 cars and away they'd go. I wonder what they were doing taking out to the reservation. Had it all. No one ever got arrested. No one ever will. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Mayor, Council, Sean, Dorothy Lane. I just wanted to share with you guys, last Monday we were here and we had to leave and couldn't speak because my daughter gets home, the oldest, and as she gets home, she lets the dogs out to go use the bathroom. As she's out there, there's one of Robert's friends breaking into the house, the garage door on the left of us. Starts yelling at her. Is this Robert's house? Is this Robert's house? No, it's not Robert's house. Get the hell out of here. He then comes onto our property and approaches her, gets right into her face, tries to grab her. Well, take me to Robert's house. Take me to Robert's house. Then last night, someone also came onto our property again, a whole different guy. Approaches Jackie and Alyssa and starts asking a bunch of weird questions. I see it. I run outside, and what the hell is going on? Well, his girlfriend, his ex, so many different stories, and I was like, look, are you here for Robert? Plain and simple. Are you here for Robert? Oh, I ain't here for that guy. I know that guy. So you know who that guy is. Now I say his name. You're going to try to avoid what's going on. In 1 week, I've dealt with 4 situations with this guy and people coming onto my property. I got a house with 3 girls in there, 4, including her. Like, what are the options? Scott Twido doesn't want to answer phone calls, doesn't want to return phone calls, doesn't want to answer questions. BPD does what they can do. It's getting to the point where, I mean, what are some recommendations? Do I quit work, stay home all day, protect them, or do I not care about them and not worry about them and just make sure bills are paid? What am I supposed to do? Be a coward, pack up and leave? Does anybody want to donate a bunch of funds to me to put down deposits and monthly rent? Why should I have to run? Why can't these problems be solved? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Don't see any, so we'll close the public comment. Oh, sorry.
I can talk loud enough. All right, my name's Nathan Scheich, 4950 Southgate Drive.
So we're gonna have you talk into this so the people on Community 7 can hear you.
All right. My thing is
I'm sorry, Nathan, what was your last name?
Scheich, S-H-I-K-E.
Thank you.
And my thing is between the sidewalk and the road, you know, like when it snows, you know, and then the plows come in and they plow the road. There's that area that's right between where the sidewalk ends and where the roads go. There's like a big 8-10 foot area that gets piled up all around downtown. And it's hard, when you're in a wheelchair, it's hard to get through a lot of those areas. And I end up having to go like down half a block and go across, the alleyways because those are kind of cleaned off. And then there's that area on 24th Street where Walmart and what is that place? Golden Corral used to be. There's a big chunk of that area that isn't shoveled off because, the Golden Corral used to be responsible for that area, but since they're not there, nobody cleans it off. And then I have to go across the street and, go to where the areas where they're shoveled off and everything like that. And that's pretty much all I got to talk about is just that area between the sidewalk and the road and this downtown area that's not cleaned off. Especially when the plows come in and they plow the road and they just pile it up right there and it's just really hard to get through. And then just that area on 24th Street, and there's other areas that doesn't get cleaned off, like on 24th and other streets and stuff like that. And I don't know if there's anybody responsible that, has, that calls these people and say, hey, can you clean your sidewalk or can you, clean that area? That's pretty much all I've got to say. Thank you, and thank you guys for your service.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll close the public comment then. Do want to comment on some of the public comment. Just tonight is an important night to actually address some of those things. So first on the issue of people coming onto your property, stick around and the nuisance statute will be explained. It's on our agenda tonight. So we'll be hearing from the fire department, police department, the city attorney's office, and then our code enforcement and nuisance team. So probably can learn something if you can stick around or watch it tonight as well. But the issue of people coming onto your property is really an issue of trespass also. So if they know they're not supposed to come onto your property, it could be an issue of criminal trespass. If it's just somebody coming on, that's not necessarily the case, but there's a possibility that it's a criminal trespass. Also, it's a civil infraction. Theoretically, you could sue somebody if it were a regular thing, if you can identify them. But those are some of the things that maybe our commentators tonight can discuss in more detail. You would need to have a person's name. You could potentially also talk to the city attorney's office about some sort of a restraining order, to keep somebody from your property. But that, again, would require identifying that person. So our deputy city attorney, maybe later tonight, could comment on those issues more. And then it looks like Nathan is getting taken care of by our code enforcement coordinator, which was exactly what I was going to suggest, to get some addresses there. So for anybody who might have been listening, if you've got similar problems, the property owner is responsible for clearing snow from the sidewalk to make sure that people who are pedestrians or in wheelchairs can get through that. And feel free to go on the city's website and report those addresses or make a phone call to the code enforcement office, and they'll take care of it because, again, that property owner is responsible. And even if a business like the Golden Corral isn't actively doing business, somebody still owns that property and somebody is still responsible. So thank you for your input, much appreciated. With that, we'll then move on to our first item up, which is our public safety update. We've got various sub-elements there. I'll turn it over to our city administrator to sort of introduce these items.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and you teed it up well. Thank you, and the questions were certainly appropriate for what the discussion will be tonight. As you mentioned, kind of in order, we're going to have fire up first, police, prosecution, code enforcement, and kind of batting cleanup will be Kevin with the nuisance property team. I'd ask to consider, as they're doing their presentations, if there's any critical clarification kind of stick to that, but have the broader dialogue and maybe broader questions, if we could save to the end, that way you kind of get all the information. Most all of these components fit together. I mean, as we saw with our discussions the last several years, I mean, improving the safety of Billings remains this organization and this community's number one priority. I have to admit, I didn't fully appreciate how much individuals' health, mental health, is critical to, it really is inseparable. The community's health and safety really go together. So I think as we get into our retreat at the end of next month and talk about what are some of the specific strategies we're implementing, more and more of these conversations are coming down to root causes, which really get into the health of our community and citizenry. So fire department's going to kick us off. I think that's probably, nope, it's not Mr. Hoppel.
No, me tonight.
That's good. So if you let them work through the presentation, do some Q&A afterwards, and we look forward to the dialogue. Last thing I'll say before we kick it off is, as a staff, it's certainly been a challenge. The more we can understand from you what is the critical information to be tracking and reporting out so that our community and you are better equipped on the policy side of the equation, as well as holding us accountable on operations, that's helpful. There's so much information here, trying to make sure that we're getting good information that's easy to understand, that's helpful in the dialogue. We're continuing to refine what we're collecting and putting together for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Deputy
Council. Kevin Johnson, Assistant Chief of Operations for the Billings Fire Department. So I put together a little slideshow just to kind of give you a quick update on where we're at right now with the public safety mill levy. So priority dispatching, we've gone through a full year now, where it's instituted in November of 21, now we're in 23, so we got one full year of data. And you can see that it's helping. Overall, the 2021 calls were a little over 18,000, and then 22 were 18. AMR, by the priority dispatching, by the BLS and low acuity calls, picked up 576 calls that didn't require a fire department response. So it does help and makes a difference. The 576 calls is continuously being adjusted because we're always adjusting protocols and working with our medical director and with AMR to make sure we're getting the best care and always providing public safety at the efficient value. The 2021-22 year saw a little bit of decrease in fires, which is good. We all know in 21 we had an active arsonist running around Billings, and so that has subsided. So you see our fire numbers dropped a little bit. EMS, though, is continuing to grow. That's even with priority dispatching in place. And so that would be around 10%, so I was able to slow the growth down only about 3.5%. And then call for service, which is your other calls all lumped in, still continues to slightly grow. And just before I come here, I was seeing how we're on task for the 23 year. And again, we're busy. We've already experienced 46 fires with 1,245 EMS calls. So we're right on par from last year's numbers that compared them. So it's not trending down. It's about staying the same, maybe upwards just a little bit. And then we had some exciting times this fall. We brought on 6 new recruits that were part of the public safety mill levy. Got them through a recruit class. They graduated in late November, and we started the MRT. That allowed us to start the first MRT, Squad 1. And then in March of this year, we bring on the remaining 4 of the 10 that we were brought on. And then they'll start the 12-week recruit academy, graduating about June 8th. And then Fire Station 8. That's been big on our topic. I know it's for many of us. Right now, we're in the architect stage. We just finished up the final drawings and changes. Now it's going to the electrical and mechanical engineering piece, and we still hope to have all that finalized by March 1, where then we can send it out for the scope of work and the bid process. Tentative date, still looking about August 1st to run the Squad 1 out of that, move it out of 6. Couple things, quick note, we're looking at Station 8, obviously, is energy efficiency. We're looking at changing out the doors because a lot of them are the original doors, upgrading some of the insulation in the doors and windows, along with placing a backup generator there as well, so that way it's a place of refuge and then to keep services always going. And then the exhaust removal system for the trucks in and out. So those are some of the key items that we're working on through Station 8. Mobile response, MRT. Squad 1 started up December 1st. And since its date of start up until February 15th, it's ran 442 calls for service. And then we're looking at Squad 2, tentative start date would be July 1. And that would be after this next set of recruits are graduated. So you can see with the institution of the squads, it's a smaller vehicle. It's able to get around with a 2-person crew. And that's saving wear and tear on the larger engines. But at the same time, it's providing a very good service. And if you look at the calendar year for the projection at the current rate that Squad 1's running, 2,500 to 3,000 calls in a year. So it's a busy unit. It doesn't cool down very often. And then just a part of that too, with the priority dispatching, there was 19 calls for service just in the Heights area alone that didn't require an engine response. The CPSM progress report remains the same as you guys previously were briefed on. 26 implemented or in progress, 6 collective bargaining agreements. We do start contract talks March or April 1 of this year. 1 legislative and 1 belongs to another department. So I told you it'd be kind of short and sweet, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Very good, thank you. There was a request that we try to hold most of our questions high level until we've had all the presentations, so we don't get bogged down on anyone. But if there's just a straightforward, factual question, you don't want to forget it, please feel free. Anything? Councilmember Purinton?
I have a question. I don't know if it's going to get bogged down, but so on the recommendations on the collective bargaining issues, what are those and how far along are we on those, or are we?
You want to go ahead? Yeah.
Kevin was at the table with him, so.
Thanks, Mayor and Councilmember Purinton. We just met last week with the fire department. We have not started collective bargaining yet with the fire department. That does open up in April. So what we're doing right now is lining those issues out, and then how do we go about, presenting those to the labor side of things and then discussing them from there. We are looking at doing, they call it infinity bargaining now, or interest-based bargaining now, to where you have more of a dialogue, more of a discussion, rather than just passing proposals back and forth. So we'll see if we go down that road. We'll present kind of our ideas. I mean, obviously, they've seen the CPSM report, so we'll have those dialogue and those discussions with them, but we have not started yet.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 questions. One, with that list of things of the CPSM, what is the one legislative item, and do you know where that's standing right now?
The one legislative item was on building codes, the chief operator in sprinkler systems, and that's currently moving through legislative right now.
Okay, so that you expect that to pass then, or?
I don't really have enough information to say either way. It's getting obviously.
If you can get that bill to us and to the City Council Legislative Committee, we can maybe track that and kind of take a look at it and help get that through.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And then another question I have is, these are good numbers to see that, these, what do you call them? The mobile units being used, things like that. So one of the things they were supposed to do, and of course then the dispatch call-in also reducing some of the calls out for that. So can you quantitatively give us a number of what this is saving the taxpayers on by having 576 calls that you guys don't have to roll on. And then also the MRTs having to go out instead of the others. Can that quantitative number be provided to us in some kind of report sometime?
Yes, it probably can be, because we kind of know what each call and cost of unit hours for our apparatus will get you those.
Okay, I think that'd help because we did spend a lot of money to do this and we want to see how we're recouping some of that money. So,
Sure.
thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to our next presentation. Chief St. John.
Mayor, council, good evening. Thank you. I know, Mayor, you referenced a nuisance for your reference 458111, Section 1A and B is pertinent to the question that you asked, and we can allow the city attorney's office to elaborate on that, but when we get there. But we'll talk about police department right now. As a reminder for you, our portion of the safety levy came to about $2.4 million. And with those funds, we were to add these resources to our department. The 12 sworn officers we have accomplished. The vacancies that we have right now are for retirements. And we'll have a hiring panel in a week or so. We're looking to hire 5 or 6 out of that. So we're in good shape there. The community service officers, we have 4 of 7 that are active right now, and it has been an absolute home run with that group. They are doing a fantastic job across the board, garnering lots of accolades from police officers, which is hard to do when you're kind of doing the same type of work. We got to make sure they don't get too much dumped on them. I'm seeing that happen, but outstanding job there. So CPSM really underestimated the impact for us because it's just been tremendous. So we look forward to get the other 3 on board. The hang up there is vehicles. We're trying to get one put together, trying to get equipment for them, and then we'll get them on board. Our 5 identification and evidence personnel and our 1.5 clerical, you can see down below, total there, 30 out of 39.5. So we have a few positions to hire, but for the most part, we're in pretty good shape. And again, 3 of those vacancies are the CSOs. So we're in pretty good shape as far as hiring everything that was allotted to us through the safety levy and supported by you. Once again, I will say that we are an employer of choice. We routinely have many more applications than we have positions. People want to come here and work, and that's a good thing. So very excited about that. A reminder for you as well as we move forward, this has been and will continue to be our strategic objectives as we move forward, reduce that violent crime, improve downtown safety, improve our traffic safety, and then continue to support our partners in the community with mental health, co-occurring issues, and homelessness issues. And of course, you are instrumental in that because the segment of money from the safety levy, you ultimately decide where that gets allocated to. For the second half of 2022, pleased to report that we're seeing some reductions here. So a reminder that an incident is pretty much when people call or officers do some self-initiated activity. We track everything. And then a case is created when the officer takes some sort of definitive action, such as write a report, make an arrest, issue a citation, things of that sort. So the incidents were down just a little bit, and commensurate, the cases were as well. So that indicates that there wasn't quite as much going on, total second half. When we look at our violent crimes, you can see that we had a reduction from 2021 and also a reduction in property crimes. I think everybody is aware of an email Councilmember Rupsis sent, questioning some of the math or whatnot. What we have done here, in the violent crime category, all of these are counted, which would be homicide, attempted homicide, sex assaults, robbery, assault, criminal endangerment, PFMA, and burglary. And then on the property crime side, arson, motor vehicle theft, and theft. When we turn to the next slide, note the selected violent crime at the top. What I wanted to provide for you was information that is acutely front and center in our media, to our community, and to you. These are the things that we hear about time and time again. So it's not representative of all of the violent crime that we're seeing, it's the selected ones. And as you can see, slight reductions in aggravated assault. Homicides, unfortunately, are up. PFMA strangulations are up. Misdemeanor PFMAs are stagnant. And then robberies and sex crimes, all categories are down. So the thing I'm pleased with there is that we didn't see any significant upward spikes. We were able to turn things down in some areas, and we were able to be stagnant in others. And so, again, with the application of the additional resources and some of the strategies, we were able to get this thing at least leveled out and turn the other way in some instances. Same situation on the property crimes. Again, we selected those that are pertinent, or they're all pertinent, but those that you probably hear about more. And again, we're seeing downward trend here, which is good. Criminal mischief, burglary are down, up a little bit on the trespass. And I would say that is because of a program we implemented citywide, which basically gave unilateral authority to property owners to initiate trespass complaints. So I'm pleased to see that went up. Theft, all categories, and then vehicle theft. So again, the message there is that with those selected crimes, our strategies have made a difference in the second half. We'll be presenting, the year-end report here in a few weeks for you. Arrests are down a little bit, but obviously coincide with incidents being down. The other thing I will say most definitely correlates with Ms. Schnecksnyder is going to tell you about their prosecutions. We are seeing these crimes go down because offenders are being held accountable out of their office. I will let her expound on that, but there's an absolute direct correlation to what the actions that they're taking in their office and what we're seeing on the street. Direct correlation, and it all plays out in here. Sights and warnings, of course, that is specific to our traffic enforcement. We can always do better there. I think you're well aware of that. We have far too many injury accidents, and the DUIs are still out there, but we're pretty close to where we were last year. The information regarding the warrants on this, you can see for the second half of our 3W, this would be the designation where we coulda, shoulda, woulda taken somebody to jail, so 1,000. We did something else with them, and then the 1Rs, which we got started a little bit late. That designation is they were turned away. You can see second half of 22 was 139. And again, these are people that, are not being held accountable for various reasons, and I'm sure some reoffend. Citizens are tired of it, want to know answers, and of course, officers are frustrated. I will tell you, and Councilmember Purrington can vouch for this, I hope, that the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee is working their tails off to come up with solutions. She sits in, Councilmember Rowan on occasion there, but they are working really hard to reduce the capacity of the jail with some pretty creative programs. And so we continue to work there. I'd like to be able to report that those 3Ws and 1Rs next go around will be lower numbers. And I don't know what they're doing. I'm hearing a lot of officers the last couple of weeks take people to jail. So that's good. I don't know what they're doing. I don't care. Go to jail. That's where they belong. And then, since we're typically a negative-based profession, I'd like to end on a positive note. You know, our officers are active, and they're doing a lot of good things. Along with our brethren at the fire department, we had that charity softball game. Just a great outing for family, generated a ton of money for our respective donatees, I guess if that's the word. We were giving away turkeys instead of tickets on Thanksgiving. It wasn't a tofurkey this time, which I couldn't even give away if I have to. They even said they'd rather take a ticket than a tofurkey. Coffee with a Cop is up and running. Basically, what we do is go to various coffee shops and get behind the counter. And hopefully we, serve up a pretty good drink. But again, we're interacting with the community. I think we've been to 4 or 5 different shops doing that. Trick or treat, we always have people come by the police department. Shop with a Cop was a tremendous success for the second year, generated so much donated money that we could carry it into the school year. So not only did we get Christmas presents taken care of, we got school supplies taken care of. And then we partnered with the comm center. They picked out a family to do a Christmas delivery. So once again, there's more good than bad going on in this community. Police department's doing their part on that. And Mayor, I will tell you without reservation, your police department's working their tail off to provide great service. The crime issues are real. But we're working hard to mitigate those things. Mayor?
Thank you, Chief. Chief, I wonder if you could just comment on, we heard about the problems of people coming onto the Garcia property and Callan property. Is there anything we can do there specifically? Could we have the trespass agreement with them, just as we have with downtown merchants, for example?
Yeah, certainly, Mayor. Again, it's very difficult on a private residence, much easier on a property. We can certainly serve people no trespass warnings. They have to be notified. I'll see if we can, extend the trespass program to residents, and we can do the same thing in that particular case. If anybody shows up on a property that's not welcome there, they can get arrested, no questions asked. Again, misdemeanor crime, probably given a notice to appear, probably not going to jail. Probably will have a non-appearance warrant, but at least we can take some action. I think the nuisance property would really apply not so much to people wandering on my property, but to the situation that's creating having people wander on my property. It's a cumulative type thing where we'd have to get reports, be working with code enforcement, and ultimately at some point in time, legal would say yes or no on what to do with that. Again, a misdemeanor on that, and who would get, probably I would assume the property owner if they're creating that situation. But again, we're working hard on that. It's very difficult situations, very unfortunate.
Thank you. Again, any questions? Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Rowan?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, you've talked about strategies for a lot of things, but the one that I get calls on day and night is one, and you know what it is, speeding and traffic. Can we, at some point, maybe develop a strategy for red lights and speeding versus, there's nobody around? And I mean, it's becoming a joke that Billings is the worst place to drive in. Just an observation.
Council member, absolutely. We would apply the same strategy that we are with our violent crime, and that is hotspot policing, where we are going to use our crime analysts to determine where the problem areas are, and then we are going to get after problematic people, problematic areas. We do that for you now. As your neighbors call, we move our traffic unit here and there. I refer to it as whack-a-mole. The problem pops up, we smash it down, then we'll go someplace else and it pops up. So that's the biggest strategy there. I'd like to leverage our speed trailers a lot more. They're more effective in the warmer months to basically multiply our ability to get indicators of speed. And then you have some legislation going on up in Helena, trying to at least give some local input on implementation of red light cameras. I don't know where that's at. It was a resounding fail last time it was up there. But those are all options that we have.
Thank you, Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two quick questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
I want to pull a little on this thread, Chief, that the mayor had about the nuisances. From your perspective, do we need a stronger public nuisance ordinance, a drug house type ordinance that other municipalities have pursued? And you may not be able to answer this, Karen might have to, but do we have the authority at the municipal level to pursue forfeiture?
That I would have to defer on the forfeiture side of thing. I think the mechanism for public nuisance is there in state statute.
Okay. Robust
However,
enough?
pardon me?
Is it robust enough?
And that was where I was going to go. I don't know what the penalty aspect is on that. But certainly, I know we have, in conjunction, it's mainly supporting code enforcement, we have knocked houses down for various reasons. They've become such a nuisance. They were unsafe, uninhabitable, and they take a half a day to run a D9 cat through it and knock it down. That a couple, 3 times I'm aware of. Mr. Friday might have more information on that. So that is not unheard of. And certainly there's some places around here that could use that.
Yeah. Okay. Can we go back to the chart, please, on the violent crimes?
On the which one?
The violent crimes?
Violent crime. That one?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a couple clarifying questions here because like Councilmember Roops is, I'm struggling to kind of jive some of the numbers. So the strangulation numbers here, PMFA strangulation, sort of tracks with your 2021 report in terms of a half year of data. But the PMFA number, is that just aggravated PMFAs?
Those are misdemeanors.
Right, except the numbers don't track. So in your annual report, in your aggravated assault category, you show 88 PMFAs, aggravated PMFAs for 2021. So that number sort of follows. But then there's 900 non-aggravated PMFAs in your annual report. So I'm just trying to track our numbers here.
Yeah, and I'd have to look at that.
That's fine. If you just want to send me an email and.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And when I was looking at Councilmember Rups's email, we're drawing on several different data points.
Yeah.
Probably surprise you, they don't all say the same. The one issue with the neighborhood dashboard that he was referring to is it's a 6-month rolling calendar and the earliest month falls off.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get different numbers on that. So we've identified that, looking to make some corrections and clean some stuff up. The thing is there's so much minutia information out there that I want you to have what's important, and this is what's important in the area of our violent crime.
Agreed. So if you could just help me reconcile
clean
those
it up,
numbers with
yep.
your annual report. And then similarly, you and I have had a conversation in December, and I've had this conversation with others as well, that we sort of have a backlog of arrest warrants in some categories. I know the county attorney's office is struggling with it. I know we've got those issues here. How does that affect this data?
These are reported calls. And so the warrants would be ones that they may have happened this year. They may have happened second half. We just haven't made an arrest on them. And you're right, there are hundreds of them that come in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, couple of things. First of all, it's good to hear that you say that the officers are arresting it, they're being prosecuted, and that means it's going down, the crime is going down a little bit in certain areas. That's got to be good for the officers too, because it's got to be terrible for morale to just arrest someone and they just have to either release them, or as soon as they're arrested, they're out on the street again doing the same thing. So I am concerned about the morale of the officers. And it's great to see that community service officers are helping with that. And that's important, but I want you to expound on really with these community officers, what are they doing for the public? I mean, by having these there, that's great. The officers are happy, the morale is better doing that, but expound onto what does the public get out of having these extra personnel helping out?
Well, Councilmember, community service officers really fill the void between our volunteers and our sworn officers. They are now getting an employee come to their house and talk to them, collect evidence, take statements, write reports, pick things up for us, videos from stores. So what you're having is the person-to-person contact, where before that, if you didn't have a suspect, witness, or evidence, you didn't get a police officer. You have a volunteer call you and ask a series of questions for a report. So they have filled the void between getting a sworn officer and getting a phone call. So just the contact alone has been crucial. Other than that, they support our police operations like crazy. One of the worst things that can happen, for a citizen in Billings is have me be the primary guy in an accident. And that happened last week. And who was there to help me? Was a CSO. Did an outstanding job. And that's, people don't know. They just see a unit out there and a couple of guys standing around. But the CSO, a civilian position, non-sworn, doesn't carry a firearm, no arrest authorities, did a great job interacting with the public, talking with people. And those connections, that's what people want. They want to talk to somebody about some things, and that's what we didn't have before. I'm looking forward to getting 3 more on board. They're going to make a huge difference.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I wanted to be able to make sure that we're spending all this money, but the community is actually getting something.
Absolutely.
One of my thoughts was that these were supposed to allow the officers to be on the street more and do more things. And unfortunately, what I'm hearing is it's taken a half hour for officers to come when they get the call. And so I'm not, and again, that's, those are, one-off incidences that I'm hearing. That, of course, you always hear the bad, but I wanted to ask you, what do you hear about your call time, your response time? Is that increasing? Because, again, we're hiring a lot more officers. We have more of these people to help the officers stay on the street more, but yet I still get some calls and hear people that the officers are not able to show up.
Well, Council Member, I can tell you that our 911 response is right where it needs to be. So we're probably, within 3 or so minutes, I'd have to look on any particular 911 call. And that's where really we're looking at. So the calls for service that you're referring to, our dispatchers prioritize calls as they come in. And sometimes people get bumped down depending on what it is and what we have going on. I can get you the numbers on what our average time is, but I haven't heard, you hear it all the time. I waited forever for an officer. Well, 30 minutes or something to wait on a burglary or a cold burglary, given the things that we have going on, not all that unusual. But I haven't heard a ton of that stuff, but I can get you numbers from
I think it would be helpful for the public to see that the response times are dropping because we're adding more officers. That's another avenue to show that, hey, we are being more responsive. The city is able to get out there and meet that. But right now, I'm not hearing that. And I guess the last thing I've heard also is going back to Councilmember Boyette, talking about the speeding. We see, and I see a lot too. I see a lot of speeding, and I'm wondering, is it only the step officers that are actually passing out the tickets, or are every officer going out there trying to taking the time to actually pull someone over when they see them speeding?
Council Member, the latter. It is part of our job description to enforce traffic. The traffic guys, that is their job. So the other ones have other calls to take care of or whatnot, but it is expected that everybody enforces traffic. Sometimes we run into issues because state law says you cannot put numbers on or productivity standards on traffic enforcement. So it's difficult to manage if you have somebody that says, I'm not going to write a ticket. However, we don't have that. Some can, we can pick it up, absolutely. That's that slide that referenced. That's not just the traffic unit, that's the entire department. And my commanders will tell you, we always masking them. Let's go pick it up a little bit. When you're not doing anything, don't be a blue tourist. There's plenty of traffic enforcement. Everybody ignores probably 100 citations on the way to work. And so there's ample opportunity for that, and we just need to pick it up. So your point is well taken.
One more question, Mayor.
Okay, and then Councilmember Joy
With the
and
162
Purington.
officers that we have now, full staffed, what does that put per shift? How many, a lot of times you always hear it's 9, minimum 9, but really, where does our shift now, size is it now?
Yeah, great question, council member. I have been to, afternoon shift is the one that we have loaded up because that's where the work is. They had, last couple times, they had probably 15 or 16. We had several beats that were doubled up, and we had, a car which was doubled up and doing a special project. So that was great. I had to ask them if it was a holiday. Not so many people were there. And it was good to see. And so when you're having to put 2 people in a car, it's good stuff. We're not going to work with 9 very often any longer.
Okay,
And
that's good to hear.
especially when we have numbers of, the 162 out of 167. We're in pretty good shape there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I don't think this question has been asked for a couple of years, but I would like you to speak to the number of rape kits that have been processed and whether or not we're making any progress in holding that aspect of crime accountable, those people accountable for crime. Thank you.
Council member, I don't have specific numbers right now. I can certainly get those to you. Again, all of our sex offenses for the second half went down. So how they break up, I'm not sure. I'm not going to waste your time, and I will get that information on that specific charge.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for your report. This is probably less of a question than more of a good job, guys. But I will say again, having done a couple of ride-alongs, take the opportunity to do it because you will have a lot of these questions answered in real time with what our police officers are actually doing. And you will see that they love their job. And so far I haven't seen the morale thing, but I don't see every officer either. But that was mentioned to me by another officer. But even if you go on the weekends, you probably have a lot of activity on the weekends if you work during the week. So I would encourage you to do that. One of the things that whenever you gave your report on what the police officers do for the community, one of the things that I found out is that the police officers are actually given the duty, if you will, or the suggestion whenever you're just patrolling around, go to the elementary schools, go to the schools, see if they're locked down. And if they're not, go to the principal. Because I think as parents and grandparents, they're not in school yet, but the idea is that, you want to make sure too that your children are safe in the schools. And so I think that was a big boost to hear that this is another thing that our officers are doing. And I asked a police officer, I said, well, how many of the police officers do you think will actually do that? He said, all of them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. That's easy duty. That's easy duty. And if I can just address the morale real quickly, and then I will sit down if the mayor will allow that. When you start looking at symptoms of a morale issue, you're looking at excessive sick time. You're looking at a significant number of complaints and a significant number of use of force complaints. We have none of that. So that's a good litmus on, what the morale is. Police officers are like the military. They're not complaining there's something wrong. Okay? So things are good. So, Mayor, I'll be seated if.
Well, you would, but I'm not going to let you go. Quite sweet. I got one last one, okay, and then we'll let you sit down. Fairly simple one, though. So many outstanding warrants creates lots of issues. Do we ever do kind of a warrant holiday or blue light special or 2-for-1 or, warrant Wednesdays or something to encourage people to come in, promise them basically a good deal to get things taken care of and clean up some records, but still create some accountability?
Great question, Mayor. Yes, we do that. It's a warrant roundup through the district court. They rotate through once a month. And essentially it is come in, get reattached to your attorney, to the court system, get another court date. Nobody's going to jail to speak of. They basically get a reset. And that's been very, very effective. We support it. We have people who work it. The sheriff's office has people who work it and does probation and parole. So essentially, we invite people in, want them to come in. Basically, it's a free pass to get reconnected with the judge. And then, he or she will do what they do, and then get back going again. So we don't have all these warrants.
If those are only happening in the district court, should we be looking to do something equivalent in municipal court?
Well, I think what municipal court allows is the district court judges and the JPs to adjudicate some of their stuff as well. And really, we're just looking to get them introduced back into the system. But yes, certainly the more processes that we have to clean things up, the better. And I know it's labor intensive and expensive. When you're talking misdemeanor crimes, there's a year statute of limitation. So somebody's not going to get justice if I got a warrant sitting in a drawer and we can't get to somebody. So certainly, and again, now that goes to the back end. We got capacity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Appreciate it, Chief. We'll go to our next presentation, which I believe is City Attorney's Office.
Sunday, get him at church.
All right. Thank you for the technical assistance. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I wanted to give you an overview of how our office is operating in both the domestic violence section, which you're generally used to hearing about, but also the non-domestic violence section. We still, at this time, have 4 non-domestic violence prosecutors and 2 domestic violence prosecutors. We had actually filled that 3rd domestic violence prosecutor position, and then we had a prosecutor retire on us. So we lost that position, and we are back to 4 non-domestic violence prosecutors and 2 domestic violence prosecutors, and we are diligently looking for the next 2 prosecutors to join us. Right now, as I mentioned in the written materials that you received in your packet, we used to have a significant salary advantage over some of the other jurisdictions and agencies. We no longer have that. They've upped their pay. They've upped their benefits. So we've lost a little bit of a competitive advantage. However, we do think that we make up for that in terms of our work environment. Our non-domestic violence prosecutors average 950 new misdemeanor cases to consider or file every single year. I gave you some of the more common causes of actions, the crimes that we're looking at. This is not all that we do. This does not even include our driving while suspended or revoked, no insurance, reckless driving, criminal trespass. Those are not up there. But I did want you to see some of what we look at each year. I'm going to look for a different slide here. Okay. The crime that we have the most cases referred would be our theft. We have had in 2022 715 different cases referred to us by the Billings Police Department that alleged theft. They may have alleged something other than theft, but it may have been theft and criminal mischief, theft and criminal trespass, but there was a theft allegation. Of all of the cases that reference theft, we filed 573 of those cases. That's 80% of the theft cases that came in have been filed. Of those cases, there were 742 allegations of theft. So you may have had somebody who came in that had 2 theft counts on one case, and that's why your counts referred will always be higher than your cases referred. Again, that works out to be about 80% of the accounts that were filed. I did want to highlight the theft case because this is something that we've made significant progress on in the last year. Our prosecutors have developed a new and more streamlined way of charging our thefts so that we can generate and file those complaints a lot faster. It benefits primarily our big box retailers who before we were really not staffed to handle $100 shoplifts from Walmart. And so we focused our theft prosecutions typically on our smaller retailers and our service providers. For example, when I was a prosecutor, I charged a case where somebody went in the middle of a pandemic, got a $150 manicure and pedicure, and then walked out without paying for that service. Those were the kind of thefts that really got our attention a lot more than necessarily a $150 shoplifting theft from Walmart. It just takes a certain amount of time to charge those. Our prosecutors have developed a way to file those a lot faster. We have gone from charging about 60% of the thefts, the misdemeanor thefts that come through our office, to charging 80%. And given that that is the most common crime that passes through our office, we have made significant steps in that. We're very pleased with those results. On the DUIs, that's our second most common crime, and we file about 97-98% of those cases. The ones that don't get filed are typically ones in which there may be a question about not being able to put a driver behind the wheel of a car or not being able to prove that that car was operational. Those things both require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and sometimes those just don't come across very clearly. Assaults typically are a much closer call because not only do our prosecutors have to prove the assault beyond a reasonable doubt, we also have to have the ability to negate self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you have a case that is mutually combative, it may be a more difficult case to bring charges for. And so that's why you will see that the counts filed are so much lower for assaults than they are for thefts and DUIs. That is not to say that we do not charge and take to trial assault cases frequently. I know that when I was a prosecutor, I tried jury trials in at least 3 assault cases. Our obstructing and resisting also has a high filing rate. Our officers typically file those charges directly with the court, and so they do not need as much prosecution resources to start that out. The criminal mischief comes in about 76%, and that's because many times it's hard to determine who actually owns the property that's been damaged. If it's a rental property, if it's somebody that owns something, if it's a car and you have to try to figure out who has the title on that, sometimes those get to be a little more difficult to prove. On the criminal trespass, which that came up earlier, I did want to point out that I agree with what the chief said. You typically have to give a trespass notice to somebody to leave the property, and then that is filed. If they return again, then that is a criminal trespass crime. One of the other provisions that is in our state code is under 45-6-201, and it's more applicable to open lands, but it also is applicable to all private property. There are certain ways that you can post no trespassing notices and the requirements to that. And if you have posted the proper signage, then it is a crime to enter or remain if that signage meets the requirements under 45-6-201 sub 2. So I did want to point that out, that in addition to giving somebody a no trespass warning, you do have the ability to post notice. This gives you a bar graph of what the chart just said, which just shows you the relative proportions of thefts to DUIs, to assaults, to criminal mischiefs. That gives you a visual of how much more prevalent theft is in our city and in our misdemeanor courts. Moving on to the domestic violence misdemeanor cases that we handle. And this again is for calendar year 2022. Our domestic violence prosecutors have an average of 550 new cases every single year. So they will start the year with a certain number of cases, about 550 come in during the year. Some of those you'll carry over to the next year. We had 681 cases of partner family member violence that were referred to us in 2022. Of those, we filed 337 cases. When I looked at the chief's chart, it may very well be that those were felony PFMA cases, which would be your fourth PFMA. These are the misdemeanor cases. It appeared that on his chart, those were all felony offenses. There were 700 incidents of partner family member assault. Of that, we filed 353. Many times these are not directly filed by our officers because the defendant has left the scene or the suspect has left the scene. So there is no one to ticket, to give notice, to directly file that, and those will be referred to our office to determine whether or not to make that filing. That also gives us the opportunity to determine whether or not it is a first partner family member assault, a second, or if it's third or higher, we will refer that over to county. Violation of no contact orders, then are next. Violations of order of protection are after that. You'll see that there's a significant drop-off between violations of no contact orders and violations of order of protection. A violation of an order of protection is a highly, highly technical crime. You have to have an enforceable order of protection, which has its own hoops to jump through. You have to show that there is notice to the defendant of that order of protection, that you can prove proper service. So it gets, it's a very serious stackable offense, but it is also very technical in the way that it is filed. The other offenses drop off quite steeply from there: sexual assault, privacy and communications, and stalking. We sometimes have fewer of those cases filed because, not always, but a lot of times it's very helpful to have a cooperative victim. And sometimes we don't have that. Well, I think I had a chart that said, Kevin. Is it, no, just 4, but I didn't show that one. Yeah, there's not a button I'm afraid to push. There you go. Okay, thank you. This also shows you the drop off in the types and categories of crimes. So clearly our domestic violence prosecutors are the most highly focused on our partner family member assaults. They're stackable. They can have the greatest impact, particularly when they reach a felony level, when somebody gets their third. Also, their prosecution rate is about 50%, which is about what our assaults are in the non-domestic violence cases. So we are looking forward to adding a couple of prosecutors and hopefully filing some more of these violations of orders of protection and no contact orders And if there are any questions that you want to ask now, I will endeavor to answer those.
Thank you, Karen. Just two quick ones here, I think. Where you left off, at one point, the domestic violence prosecutions were as high as 80% a few years ago. Now we're about 50% because we're shorthanded. Is that 80% number a good target for us to aim for?
I am not sure about the calculation of the prior numbers, and whether or not those were the totality of the cases that came in all together as opposed to the partner family member assaults. But we are considering a wide volume of those cases, and that may be where that 80% number came in.
Okay, and then lastly, you heard the comments by Jacqueline Garcia and Sean Callahan about people coming on their property. Do you have any advice for them, having heard what the chief said and what they said?
There are a couple of avenues in the civil realm that are available to people whose use of property is being impaired. You can file a nuisance complaint civilly with the help of a private attorney. That is a completely viable way to do that. You can also file a civil trespass suit. I do think that the signage may allow for a faster response in terms of BPD being able to ticket somebody the first time, as opposed to having a trespass warning issued and then maybe they don't come back onto the property. Again, most likely somebody is going to need to still be on the property by the time BPD responds. It's not a foolproof by any stretch of the imagination, and a private attorney may be able to help them avail themselves of the nuisance statute, which can be brought by any individual. So there is a private cause of action there.
Okay, thank you. And if they had questions about what the signs should say, they could give you a call?
It can be, actually, let me go ahead and give you the statute. And since the city attorney's office does not represent private individuals, we represent the city. The requirements for the size and the color of the signage can be found on 45-6-201, sub 2.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rowan?
Just while we're on that topic, I was hoping you could, Karen, comment on the question that I asked Chief as well. Would the city benefit from a stronger municipal ordinance that specifically targeted drug houses as other municipalities have done? And if we did that, would we have the ability to pursue forfeiture, noting, of course, that you can't generally ask someone to forfeit their primary residence?
I did have the answer to the forfeiture, and that was recently eliminated as a remedy, unfortunately.
At the state level?
At the state level. So that is no longer available as a remedy. And a lot of states have used that successfully.
Yeah.
And the federal government has also used that successfully.
So what could we do locally to have a more robust municipal ordinance on nuisance properties, specifically maintaining drug premises?
The remedies that we have right now are those that have been briefed to council regarding the colonial apartments and the approach that's being taken there, because there is a crime issue with those properties. So there is a state ordinance that does allow for the abatement of public nuisances if you can meet certain of those requirements.
I got you.
And if we use that, and we have filed a couple recently in district court, so we're making progress there, that if we start to try to enforce those in district court, we might be able to abate nuisances better. And whether or not we need to change our city ordinances or not, I don't know that that is necessary. I do know that we need that jurisdictional change that is in Mr. Yakowicz's proposed legislation, that would go a very, very long way of getting more of the eyesores. But in regards to the criminal activity, that is encompassed under the state statute, and I think that that is the appropriate avenue.
Okay, maybe we'll discuss more at the discussion time, because I'm not quite getting my question answered.
Well, I may not know the answer. That could be it.
Thank you, Councilor Puritan. Councilor Renese?
Oh, great, I just forgot what I was asking. I'll pass right now.
We'll come back to you, Councilor Renese.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the information. I think it's good to see some of this, but I'm really concerned. I would hope that you can get us information of how we compared to last year on some of these percentages, because the idea was that we were going to bring more prosecutors online to help take care of more problems that are in the city, and I think we heard from the chief that's working, but I don't see, how really, where did we improve last year? Because we have to answer to our constituents who say, hey, we just have all these public safety mill levies, and all this money we're spending, where did we do? I said, well, we're at 80%. What is that? Maybe we were at 90% last year. We don't know that based on the report that you're giving us. And so if you could give us some good information that we can compare, what did our public safety mill levy dollars do to help, prosecute some of these criminal activities? Because when I look at the domestic violence, I'm 26%. To me, that's doesn't sound like that something's working there. And so I think that we need to, but maybe that's good. Maybe it was 15% last year. I don't know that. And so if we can get some better data on measurements, and then as the mayor mentioned about what is a good practice, what should we shooting for as far as having cases filed and having cases, prosecuted and things like that. I think it would be a good idea for us to be able to measure those type of things. But again, I like to hear from what the chief said. It tells me that the prosecution that we did is hiring some, but I can't really see measurably how it's doing over last year. And the same thing with the caseloads. 550 this year, but what were they last year versus same thing at 950? What were they last year on that?
Last year, Councilmember Denise, Mayor, I can answer that. Our cases per prosecutor are down a little bit, but some of that is related to the fact that we no longer have possession of marijuana cases, and we no longer have the paraphernalia that accompanied those possession of marijuana cases, so they are slightly less. I do those numbers every single year, and they were running about 1,084 last year, so they're down roughly about 130 new cases a year. We migrated our software in 2022. Actually, we did it mid-2021, which makes pulling historical data and comparing it a little tougher because we're trying to pull data and compare it to what we have access to now. So can that be done? Yes. Will it take significant resources to go back and pull that? Yes, also. So.
Thank you. I think that'll really help.
Thank you, Councilor Puritan.
I got hung up on the public nuisance thing. Okay, so on the theft part, Karen, so it's a misdemeanor if it's below that $1,500 level.
That is correct.
So what is the minimum that is considered misdemeanor? I mean, they stole something worth $50. Is it worth it? I mean, that's where I'm kind of going with, where's your level?
So a $50 theft is still a misdemeanor. There's not a minimum.
Okay.
So it will depend on whether or not there is some other aggravating factor. In other words, on occasion, we will have retailers who are able to pull together multiple cases where an individual is underringing significantly. They will come in, they will swipe their card for their customer loyalty, and then they will literally fail to ring things across the scanner. And you can have somebody that comes in and does that on a regular basis. They may pay for 9 of the 10 things, but they don't pay for that 10th thing. when we see something like that, that is something that we will file and we will pursue. Sometimes we can aggregate those as a common theft scheme and make a greater charge. Just so that you're aware, on theft first offenses, somebody shoplifts for the very first time, the statute typically has a presumption that you're entitled to a deferred imposition of sentence if the amount of what you stole is $100 or less, to kind of give that child shoplifter another shot.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So that brings to another question with regard to the big box stores. And not only those, but also national chains. I just read an article where they were talking about that the CEOs, they want the cities to do more. We want to hire more cops and all this. And I'm just going, the way that some of them have their checkout set up, it invites them to walk away. I was at Walmart, I think, and yeah, it was Walmart because the self-checkout, and I go up there, someone was there before me, and there was a balance of $14 and something, and I'm going, wait a minute, I can't use this. And so the gal comes over and, is that yours? No. So someone just rang it through and then left.
Correct.
So at least they know how much they stole. But the point is that, and I think the chief has talked about it before too, the cooperation that we have within our community and the managers, I don't know that they get into high-level CEOs of these corporations, but a lot of them, they just let them walk out. Don't stop them, just let them go. And, so what is that attitude that we have, I think, with our retailers in Billings? How cooperative are they? I know some of them actually hire some security and others don't. Others just let them go. So what does that do to our theft numbers? They're encouraged to report, but some are going, no, I'll get fired if I report it. So where are we with all of that?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Purington. That is one of the reasons why, when we were only prosecuting 60% of the cases, we chose to focus on the smaller retailers. The theory being that is built into the profit model for big box stores. They understand that if they take away the human checkers and give you a self-checkout, that a certain number of people are going to not total out and ring out that final payment, which is why you saw the $14, or they will underring. And they've decided that eliminating those jobs is cost effective in terms of comparing that to the amount of theft that is going away. Now, our big box retailers are very good about having security people in the store, not necessarily to stop shoplifters as they're leaving, but to capture that video footage, to watch for shoplifters, to identify them, which quite frequently is done with our little frequent shopper fobs. I guess people just don't think if they scan their Albertsons card, we don't know who you are. You signed up for that card. So our retailers will put the case together very well for us. They will package up the surveillance. They will give us the still shots. They will call BPD and say, we have a case for you to come and pick up. We've either identified the person or we haven't identified the person. They have all of that information ready. If the defendant can be identified, we go ahead and file that case. If it's a theft first, we will issue a summons and they will be notified they have a charge and to come to court. If it is a theft second or a third, then we will have a warrant issued, most likely, and give them a letter letting them know that there's a warrant, come to court, so we can start you through the process. But there really is a well-organized loss prevention strategy in some of your big box stores. Target has been excellent to work with. Walmart has been excellent to work with. Shields is excellent to work with. And they have it down pat how they build their cases to give them to us so that we can prosecute them easily.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Council, we've still got to hear from our last presenter before we get to our DES presentation. So let's move on to our final item, our code enforcement. Actually, it's not really final, code enforcement and our nuisance team. So I guess we got a couple elements here.
No, not anymore. Okay. Okay, fair enough. I made some pretty slides, what the heck? I think it's that last one, Kevin. It's the bottom one. I think so.
Tina, you go ahead and
Sure.
introduce yourself
Good
while
evening,
we
Mayor and Council.
bring that up.
I'm here to give you an update. It was important for me to make sure that code enforcement was meeting the goals and objectives that were initially set out in the initial ask for the public safety mill levy. So what I did is I went back and located the original PowerPoint that was given to all of you in 2020. And I compared it to what we're doing today. And so that was how I wanted to create this slide. When I was reading through the presentation that was given to ask for our portion of the mill levy, I identified 4 basic areas that jumped out at me that were objectives, and those will be on the left side of your list there. And then to quantify if we're meeting those, so the results will be on the right. And some of this information I've given to you before and is rather redundant, but I did want to go through it with you one more time. The first thing that we identified was to increase staff and then legal support. So I've reported before that as of December, we are fully staffed. I have all the officers that were part of that mill levy. I've come on board, which was not part of it, but there's now a full-time manager. And our legal support is where I want to focus on for this particular bullet point. Habitually, code enforcement had been doing monthly case reviews with their city attorney that's assigned to them, which has been a great resource. But to enhance upon that, what we started to move to is now that that attorney also serves on our nuisance property team, which is extremely important because now you're sitting in a room at the table with legal advice and you're getting instant information. I serve on that team as well as my nuisance property officer, so there's good representation there. We have regular discussions with legal in order to improve our compliance efforts. In the last year, we've refined our abatement process. Now we have a 1-year expiration, which means if that property comes out of compliance within the year, we can go back in without having to start the process all over again, which is a time saver. With that as well, we have been given advice as far as how to present in court better, more efficiently, to make it clearer to the judge. And then, so we've established a consistent method to do that. So not only does the judge know what to expect, code enforcement knows what they need to provide for that judge, but then when we have a pro tem, it makes it easy as well for them to follow along how we're presenting our case, and it makes it pretty clear and pretty concise. We've referred cases to district court. We have 1 currently that has been filed and several more in process. And I truly believe that that person being assigned to us, that legal support, has been instrumental in our success this past year because we've been able to just be better at what we do. The second bullet point there for early intervention and monitoring these properties and bringing them into compliance. Where I really think that we're doing well there is because we've rezoned the residential areas and we've added people, and now we've specialized with commercial and enhanced our nuisance property officers' task list. It creates a more efficient way of handling the city. So now instead of having 3 residential officers that are spread across the city, we have 5. We have more targeted areas for them to enforce. They can stay on top of some of these property owners that don't necessarily cooperate, that sometimes slip through the cracks, or they delay, or they avoid. We have officers that are now, they're on top of it, and they're able to do that because their territory is a little bit more concise and compact. And then moving to the commercial and the nuisance officers, they can just become better at their areas of expertise, and they just become more knowledgeable, and they're able to just do their job better. So I think that we've hit that one as well. The third objective that I had looked at, obviously, was the enhanced funding and capacity for cleanups. This is where we've done a lot of work. We've reported to you previously that we've done 11 abatements in 2022. We would have done more had we not hit winter. Currently, we have at least that many that we could start as soon as the weather is good. We have that many that we can move forward on. So with that effort, we could probably triple what we're doing in 2023 easily, just by the way cases are going at this point. But we're also being very responsible with those funds, because it's important to me that we stretch that dollar as far as we can so we can do more abatements, but we're also responsible with that money because it's taxpayer money. So we do that by recycling. We use city resources as much as possible, our own departments, our own divisions. We use as much cost-free labor as possible, sheriff's labor detail, treatment court participants, all of that. Code enforcement, we go out and do it. So in all of those ways, we try to stretch that dollar and make sure that we're not spending it carelessly. I am happy to announce that there is going to be a Bright Sides cleanup on the south side. We set the date today at our meeting. It's going to be May 12th and 13th, and there'll be more information on that to come. But it's basically the triangle. It'll be First Avenue South, South 27th, and State. And this is Riverstone Health that's driving this, and we're assisting. The city is assisting. So this wasn't our choice. This was Riverstone Health that chose the area and is driving the triangle. So, but we are going to be there definitely to assist them with that. And finally, the education and outreach piece. In the last year that I've been with the department, I've done numerous speaking engagements. The most recent was with the Rotary Club, and been engaged in the city in that respect. We've done several media interviews, both TV and print, and those have all been extremely positive. And then, of course, with Victoria's help, she's launched those Community 7 updates and the podcasts, which I think have been very helpful. So for me to measure the original ask versus where we are now, I think we're in a really good place, and I think that we've met most of those objectives. And I've said this before, but I am really looking forward to what's going to happen in '23. You all should have received the annual report for my division, but I just want to go over a couple of numbers for you. Last year, we had over 3,500 cases. The breakdown of those cases is on the right-hand side. As a result of those 3,500 cases, we did over 9,300 inspections. 11 abatements. We have our new one-year abatement order. 1 case is officially filed in district court, and we have 5 more that we have given to our legal counterpart to review, to see if they can move forward in district court. And of course, the implementation of the nuisance property team has been a huge asset to our division, because it's put us in the room with those other divisions that we need and rely on so that we can brainstorm on how to attack some of these problem properties. And with Kevin leading that discussion, it has been extremely beneficial. So I wanted to bring you something a little bit different tonight. And I thought about giving you some case studies as far as how a case start to finish, the life of one. This one's pretty straightforward. We had our first notice sent out on the 2nd of August. You'll see that we sent a second notice a few weeks later because by ordinance, we need to give them some time. We got no response, really no cooperation, so we immediately went to citation for court. We are issued court dates. We don't get to choose, so that's why there's a month gap there. We requested our abatement, which because of our legal assistance, our abatements are way better. They're clearer, they're more concise. They are reviewed by legal before we present them to the judge. Once we were granted that abatement, we have to wait the 30-day appeal process. And then we scheduled our initial walkthrough. Because if you remember, code enforcement, we enforce from the public right-of-way. We can't necessarily go rifling through people's property until we have that court order. So when we do that initial walkthrough, that gives us the ability to really understand what we're faced with and what we need to clean up. We can make our plan of attack. We know how many people we need. We know what resources we need. We set up the abatement. And that particular abatement, we did in 4 hours. So that's kind of the life of one. And I don't have any pictures on that one, but this next case study, I do. So I'll go through these real quick. You'll see that this officer did some options of communication in person and on the phone with this property owner, tried to work with them, tried to get compliance without having to go to court. However, we eventually did issue them a citation in December. We went to court the first time in January. We presented in front of a pro tem judge. We were found that we were proven, so he found in our favor. However, the property owner was there and was pretty convincing and was able to get an extension. So that put us into February, and we were granted the abatement at that point. This one is a 1 year, so if it comes out of compliance, we can just go right back in. But he does have the 30 days that we need to wait, so about March 16th, we can do our walkthrough, get set up, get ready to go. And as you can see, that's just 2 pictures. It's going to be a lot of work. So wanted to share those with you, and if you have any questions or anything, I'm happy to answer them.
Very good. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you. I'm not sure if you can answer, but maybe Wyatt can, but we implemented the SPA ordinance. What's the result? Can we have numbers? Is that a good question to ask? Has it worked?
Sure. On one of those slides, we did, I believe, 6 inspections. I think a total of 20 since the inception of the ordinance. We had 1 that we did take to court. We had a few that opted not to apply for the license as a result of the way the ordinance was written. But for the most part, we work with those massage facilities as far as when we get the application, we go in, we make an appointment with them. We don't just barge in. We make sure that we don't interfere with their work. We go in, we do our inspection, we fill out our checklist and work with finance as far as issuing the license. But we did have one that was working outside of hours, and we did end up taking them to court.
Just to follow up, Mayor.
Yeah.
So from the time we started this till now, can you say positively how many illegal places we've shut down or stopped business so that the public knows that this was a benefit?
We don't shut them down, we deny a license.
Right, but in
So
essence,
basically, if they are not in compliance with the licensing ordinance, then they are not granted the license and cannot operate. So I know of one that we took to court. And we had, 3 or 4 more? I think 5 total. There was a previous presentation we did on those a few months back that I can pull, but I can email that information to you if you'd like. But it has been successful because what it does is it sets some boundaries, but it also sends a message to the folks that want to come in and perhaps do something that's illegal, they know that we're paying attention. It's not targeted at anyone in particular, and it's certainly not to discourage people from opening a legitimate business. It's basically to discourage negative activity. So I see it as if you're operating a legal business, you shouldn't have any issues with it.
Thank you very much. Councilor Purinton, Councilor Owen, Councilor Gulick.
Thank you, Tina. I always appreciate your quick response on any phone calls or emails. One of the questions that I had, and I think it's in another part of the presentation, with looking at properties that have boarded windows. Some of those properties actually have boarded doors as well. Could that not be added to, I'd have to look, I think it's one coming up maybe on the public nuisance. But to me, there are some of those houses that are questionable that they have boarded doors as well, which to me is a real safety issue.
Yes, and I agree with you. The boarded structure ordinance, though, if it's inhabited or being used and utilities are hooked up to it, it doesn't qualify as an abandoned boarded structure. The ordinance is an abandoned boarded structure, that's what it falls under. So if they're utilizing it as a shop, if they have utilities hooked up to it, if they're living in it and they have a board on the window, it's not considered a boarded structure to the letter of what the ordinance reads.
I thought there was something in that public nuisance out of the state, that it wasn't just abandoned, but also if there's criminal activity going on within that structure, even though there's utilities and there are people in there. Do you still operate, second question, do you still operate by complaint only? That was one of the things I know that Councilmember Neese was real concerned whenever we increased I know, I'm talking to you, that, well, we don't want a proactive where you're driving up and down the streets looking for things.
Right.
But, so would you still say that you're complaint-driven?
I think the proactive word was more patrol. And no, we don't do that, but we are proactive. And proactive, I look at as a positive word, not a negative, because yes, we are complaint-based. However, officers are encouraged, because we have doubled our amount of officers, they are encouraged, if they're sent to a location on a complaint and they see similar violations along that street, it's only right to address those violations as well, and not just the one that was the complaint. So it's equal.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Owen.
Just a couple questions. First of all, tremendous job. You guys are really doing great work, and I always appreciate your candor and insight, so I just want to ask for a couple of them here. You said something at the start of your presentation, though, that I just wanted to clarify. You said the legal help is helping you do better in presenting your cases because you don't go in with a prosecutor, right? You present your own cases.
Right, on municipal infractions.
But you said that the legal help was also helping you do better with pro tem judges. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean?
So, and this is for probably a future presentation, because I know you guys get bored with numbers and that gets overwhelming. And honestly, I like to show you what we're actually really doing and the changes that we're making. And one of those changes is the actual packet in which, the method in which we present. We know that we get pro tem judges. We know that we're not going to get the judge that's used to reading city ordinance, because they're used to criminal and traffic codes. So what I have them do is basically, there's a cover page where you have a picture of your site on there, you have a copy of your site, what you've cited that person into court for, but then I tell my officers, I want you to cut and paste that city ordinance on there so they can read the language. That is the first thing they look at when they see our packet. The next thing, they flip over the page and they'll see an entire outline of the case. So basically that kind of short version of the bullet points of, we sent this letter, we sent that letter, it's more, it gives a little bit more detail. And it states what activity, what enforcement we tried to take to lead us to this day that we're in court. So they get that in their packet as well. And then with the supporting documentation, they get a copy of our case, they get a copy of all the photographs, to include photographs from that day. So they go out prior to court, they photograph the property so that they can see real time what that property looks like the day that they have to make that decision.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding, you're having to appear in front of pro tem judges quite often, at least
No.
often enough that you have to
No.
do it separately.
Not often enough, but we want to be consistent. So anything that you do consistently becomes a muscle memory, becomes you just know to do it that way. So it's beneficial for not just the judge, but it's beneficial for the officers. They know they have to have certain things in their packet in order to present to the judge. The regular judge expects it.
Yeah.
The pro tem, it's educational for them. And plus, it's right there. It's the down and dirty portion of the ordinance that we're trying to enforce. And there's a citation so we can show proof of service. And then we move forward through the packet from there.
So now that you've been in this position for a while, have you seen gaps in our ordinances where we could give you more tools to be more robust? Do you see areas where you think, gosh, we could do a little better if only it said this instead of that?
Yes, and we are working on those. I've actually submitted 2 or 3 already with some review comments on it, and I think Kevin's going to cover that in his presentation.
And then so just third time's a charm, maybe someone will answer this question directly. Would we be better off if our nuisance ordinance at the municipal level specifically said a drug house is a public nuisance?
From a code enforcement perspective, it's not going to affect us because we deal with property, we don't deal with people. And so when you're talking about drug activity, you're talking about people and people's activity. That is strictly.
I'm talking about the property being used, like maintaining a drug property.
Oh, okay, so basically just having it there. Again, we are bound by public right-of-way. So how would I know? How would I know that they're doing drugs in there, or if there's drugs in there, when I have to look at it from an alley, street, or sidewalk?
Okay.
So but I think that's consistent through all of our ordinances, is that's the way code enforcement operates, because we're not a sworn officer. So that would have to be handled at a different level.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And just to clarify, we still have a presentation on the nuisance team that Kevin Iflin is going to lead us through, right? Council, it'd be great to get that taken care of so we can be done with item 1 before we move on to item 2. Councilmember Hewlett, Councilmember Neese.
Just quick, thanks again for the presentation. It sounds like good problem-solving work, figuring out what are the barriers for that are keeping you from doing the job and systematically taking them down. I'll just carry the torch for Councilmember Neese. I agree that just having the data for a few years would be really helpful, so we can see the benefit of the good work you've been doing. It tells the story. Right now, it's just a snapshot. It's hard to see it without the context, and so let's make sure we can highlight the work you're doing in that context.
I promise you will still get numbers, but I also want to be able to share with you some new information.
Numbers over a few years, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ditto.
Well, that's a ditto, and I'm not going to repeat what he said, but I thank you for bringing that up, so I don't have to say it. But first of all, Tina, you were the officer who came to our Heights Task Force. You did a great job up there, and to see what you brought to this job, it really is great to see, because you brought some structure. You've done a lot of things, and thank you so much for what you do. I think I can't say how much I think you've done for this department and how we're approaching this avenue, and even the whole idea of proactive versus not being proactive. But the one thing I have to say is I still see a lot of graffiti around the town. In fact, I was over at the dry cleaners downtown. I look over there at the Children's Museum, and what is it? I think they've got a painted wall on there, but it's graffiti all over the wall. There's the 36 with the dots on there. I mean, so I believe that's some kind of gang symboling or some kind of marking. And so I still see a lot of that over there. Can you give us some input on and I saw some numbers on your graffiti here, but can you tell us how we're doing, how are you guys doing on addressing the graffiti? I know you ramped up this year, and I'm looking forward to what you're going to be doing this year, so can you expound on that?
I can tell you that the majority of that officer's cases are graffiti cases. He carries probably 82 to 100 cases right now, and the majority of them are graffiti. He is relentless. He is putting together also a book to cover certain regular taggers, so that once we identify them, we can maybe bring in a better, bigger prosecution. We have started to do some not enforcement, but some cleanups ourselves. We started out with some of the city properties to make sure that, you know, before we ask other people to do things, we're doing it ourselves, right? But to answer your question, it is a huge problem, and that alley that you're referring to, if we don't get a cooperative property owner on there, we can't do what we want to do there. So we've met with DBA. The majority of the property owners in that alley want to paint a mural. Murals have been proven to deter that type of tagging. This particular property owner does not agree and does not want to do it. Just wants to keep painting over it and giving them a clean slate, and it's just not working. And I can't necessarily force him to do the mural. We can just continue to do the same enforcements that we're doing. One of the ordinances that I requested to have looked at is the graffiti ordinance, to change up some language in there and to make it, change it basically from a misdemeanor to a municipal infraction, because I seem to get more traction that way when we're presenting the case and when we're invested in it. It makes it easier. But yeah, you're right. He's getting complaints all the time. He's constantly on top of it, and we are trying to find solutions.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Council, let's look to Kevin and see if we can wrap up item 1.
Got about 5 things going here, trying to monitor Zoom here at the same time. Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council, and I was hoping that they would hit on everything and I could just maybe not have to do my presentation, but I think there's maybe a couple things here we'd like to touch on. So we started the nuisance property team. I think our first meeting was back in October, if I remember right, that we kind of came together. From that point, the next meeting, we'd kind of add another person or have them come in and see how they could maybe help us or we could help them. And then we just had our last meeting about a week and a half ago. These are some of the departments that are involved in that. And like Tina said, what it's beneficial for is that we all just get together and talk. Here's what we've got going on. Code enforcement is the big generator of a lot of the properties, obviously. So that's a huge, factor is them bringing properties to us that they're seeing that are in the blighted states, things of that nature. So right now we've got about 10 plus departments. And from the police side, we've got a police sergeant that comes to those meetings. We got the street crimes unit sergeant that comes to those meetings. We got the crime prevention sergeant that comes to that meeting. So we got a good overall representation, from a law enforcement perspective, code enforcement. We've got our crime analysts that I'm going to hope maybe show you a couple things that we've got going on as far as just keeping track of some things out there. With that, we've got 11 active properties out there right now and 2 that have kind of came off of the list that aren't big concerns for us anymore. Again, we can continue to monitor and do those. So these are the ones that we're actively monitoring. This is the list that I normally walk through at the beginning of our meeting and kind of see what the status of these properties are for us. What we can be doing different, maybe hopefully properties that start coming off that list because we've got some cooperation or we've, done some things that have moved these properties forward. I'm not going to go through the status of these and read these to you. You can look up those. They're out on the staff memo. But these are kind of the status reports, real brief of the properties that are on that active list right now. So just kind of buzz through those. What I want to get to is there's 3 that have been popping up that I think council have been hearing a lot about lately. 4910 Southgate Drive, that's the Wild West. That one kind of popped up in our last meeting or prior to our last meeting. So we kind of took a look at what was going on out there. These stats are from January of 22 to current, or as current as I could get them before I had to have this slideshow in. A couple takeaways from when we look at this type of data. And again, some incidents might not be captured, just depending on when I pull this data out and something. So if you see different numbers at certain points, kind of keep that in mind. But the area checks, to me, that's really important, because area checks are officers, and Councilmember Purrington, you probably saw it if you went on a ride along, that they just drive by and look. Is there anything going on there? Those area checks, 63 times we've had officers proactively going by 4910 Southgate Drive, see if there's something going on, seeing what's happening at that, location. So, some of these things are real telling to me. Okay, do we have a problem property or a nuisance property out there, and what's going on at that property? As you can see, we've got some pretty serious events that are occurring here. We've got some shootings, robberies. So yes, we need to maybe focus on this property a little bit, see what we can do. We had some discussions about this internally at our meeting about maybe what are some next steps out there. Talking to the street crimes unit and, drug unit commanders, what are they seeing happening out there? And just get general overall information. When I look for calls of service, and I'll hopefully if my computer works, I'll bring up a calls for service dashboard that I use that was created by the police department's crime analyst. This ranks number 35 on our calls for service. So it kind of gives me a perspective out of, I think, the number's pretty high, out of about 89,000 different addresses. So kind of keep that in mind. Next thing I kind of look at is the dispositions of the cases or the calls for service that went out there. So what's going on when officers are getting there? So 76 times they went out there, they took care of whatever problem is there, and they do a disposition code, if I remember it correctly. It's like 3B. Would be the disposition code, just handled that scene. So they took care of everything, there weren't any arrests, anything like that going on. But then the second one, that written report, that means if officers are out there, they're physically writing a report, turning it in, getting approved by the sergeants, and going on up the chain from there. So just a little indication, of, okay, what type of, response are the police seeing when they get there? And as you can see, these are a bunch of different, disposition codes. As you notice, it kind of ties in at the bottom. The last two, advised of warrants not served, taken to jail, not remanded. So twice they went out to 4910 Southgate Drive, and twice they haven't been able to take somebody to jail because of the jail issue or something going on, similar to what the stats that the chief reported to you earlier, the 3W or the 1R, I believe is what they call them. So we kind of take a look at that. Total calls for service at this address have been 204 calls for service since January 1 of 2022. So obviously we're keeping an eye on that one. Second one that's kind of been popping up lately is 323 South 31st Street. And these are, looking at it a little differently. We have some proactive, officer activity occurring at this address. I see, 5 times in that period of time that we've had an officer go out there. The other kind of behind the scenes data that I look at is when is this happening, whether it be time of day or whether it be, months or anything like that. With this one here, this one just popped up. So all these calls minus one that the police department have responded to at that address have been in February of this year. Okay, so we're, obviously this one, again, a lot of council activity or emails back and forth, so we're kind of monitoring this, seeing what's going on. We got a frustrated neighbor in this area that we're going to see, what we can do. Code enforcement, as you can see on the status report, has an open case on this. And the one thing I want to kind of say that's beneficial is if we can, the process, and maybe answering some of Jennifer Owen or Councilmember Owen's, question, we try to work with the property owners because it's normally a quicker and easier solution than trying to take them to court. So my response and my answer to you, is there things that we could have different in our ordinances or maybe look at, state statutes that would help us? I think the one we're addressing, kind of raising the jurisdictional rate from 9,500 to 25,000. We'll touch on that later and stuff. And then some of the ordinance changes that I'll kind of touch on later. I think the big piece of that is like our team getting together, education on our part, being familiar with, what the process is, being, making the judges more familiar with what the process is, that totality of that, I think, will help more than anything. And then we've got proactive code enforcement officers that are going out there, contacting these property owners, trying to work with these property owners. I'll use, one that we filed a case on in January. We've got good cooperation coming from the property owner and the property owner's attorney. This property owner has, several properties that, we're, touching base with and stuff and, explaining to them that, hey, there's some other properties out there. I'd much rather go down that route than automatically just filing another lawsuit. So I think it's just that education, learning the process, getting our team so we're familiar with what we can do, what we can't do, getting the judges in our court systems more familiar with the processes, because we haven't done a ton of these in the past. I think that'll help more than anything, right here in the city of Billings. And I hope that answers part of your question. I'm sure you've got more. I probably won't like them, but that's all right. Again, dispositions on here. So, when officers are going out there, they're writing reports. One thing, I think it was Councilmember Rupsis kind of indicated, should we be charging these high, calls for service locations? Certainly something we can look at. Again, from a who do we charge perspective, what I'm, going to indicate here is there's been 13 calls for service there, 12 of them in February. I think there's probably been more, but they haven't been tied to this address. They're calling because it's happening, on the street, so it's coming up at a different address, or they're getting tied to who's calling, because maybe, the disturbance is more, out in the middle of the street. It's not, specifically tied to this address. So some of those things we would certainly have to work for if council would want to go down that road. With this case here, this ranks 17,760 on calls for service. Dorothy Lane, obviously one I hear about at least every Monday night, maybe Tuesday night, of what's going on out there. Again, we've had a lot of activity there, and I want to stress this. These are the amount of calls, 80 calls for service out at, Dorothy Lane. And when I say Dorothy Lane, I'm looking at 2 addresses. I'm not just looking at a single address. I think we could expand that a little bit more and this call volume would go up, but I wanted to do just 2 specific addresses here. Again, the majority of the calls that are coming in are suspicious, and I think that's, similar to what Sean and, kind of indicated of somebody showing up at their house. They could turn into a criminal trespass, maybe or maybe not at some point. But again, we're looking at 80 calls for service. And I dug a little bit deeper, had the crime analyst dig a little deeper at this, location. On these 80 calls for service, the police response was anywhere from 1 officer to an incident that had 12 officers out there at one point in time. With that, our average response is 2 officers that respond to a call just on an average basis. The other thing that I asked her to kind of drill down on is we've had approximately 71 hours of officer-involved time out at this address since January of 2022. So we've committed significant resources out in that area trying to deal with that situation. And bar none, you talk to an officer, they'd love this problem to be resolved and go away because it's eaten up a lot of our resources. And that 70 hours doesn't account for our street crimes unit that has been out there, our city county special investigations unit that has been out there doing some work that people might not be aware of, things of that nature. It does not include that time. And I would easily estimate that you'd double that at least, amount of resources from that 70 hours that we've kind of spent out in this area. Again, what type of calls are coming in and the dispositions here? Again, we're writing a lot of reports out there. And I think some of that came from, we want to get as much documentation as we can. Can we further, the problem, the issue that's going on out there? Again, we work with code enforcement on this. They've reopened, I think, an open storage case out there again. So we keep attacking it, on the code enforcement side as we continue to move forward there. Resources and tools. So what I'm going to see if I can bring up here, if you'll bear with me for a second. And I don't think it's going to work. So working with the crime analyst, what I've done was 2 things. We've got a nuisance property basically database that we keep. So it's a live system. So what we do is we track our properties. We do it by GIS based. And then anybody on that team, anybody that wants access to that kind of database, that live database, can go in there, and we've got a notes page. So I should be able to go in there and look and then determine, right away that, here's the status of this property. What's some recent things that have been done? Where's code enforcement at? When the, lawsuit was filed on the Colonial Apartments, that's the update that gets put in there. So we've got a live database that any of our team members can go in there and access. And that's kind of that nuisance property thing. And then what I really wanted to show you tonight, which I wish I could bring it up, was the CFS analysis dashboard. And it's basically a calls for service dashboard. And what it does is very simple to operate on my end. And what I can do is just start bringing up, I can narrow it down by dates, whether it be years or whatever. And it'll bring me, it'll display me in a chart fashion of what are my top 10 calls for service by address. And then I can drill down, okay, I can click on that address, what type of calls are coming in on there. So it gives me just a real quick, easy reference point of, where are we seeing these, properties, pop up. But, one of the limitations of our system is we can't easily differentiate. We can over at the dispatch side, but between commercial and residential properties. So that's one of the things that, we might want to work on, of how can we differentiate. And most of our call volume, of our top 50 calls, and then this is a report that I generate off of that. So this is the top 50 addresses for calls for service, that I pulled up. And 2 of our properties that we're dealing with come up on this list. But then I can start drilling down, what type of properties, are they? And this is where we just got to take this one step farther. So if I could bring it up, I'd show you that I can drill down, okay, are they bars, casinos, gas station, government properties, lodging type motels, what are we looking at? I think this is the next, area in the crime prevention centers, kind of been working toward this route of how do we start dealing with some of these commercial properties that are generating a lot of calls for service, because some of these, the top 50 addresses on here are generating about 15% of the calls for service for police. So if we can start hitting those, maybe we can start making a dent, freeing up some of the officers to do more proactive stuff. Back to kind of what Karen was saying in regards to, Walmarts are some of our high call generators. It's the shoplifting. But what they're doing now, we've taken a huge leap forward. It used to be, 2 officers would go out there, deal with the shoplifter, write up the reports. You're talking probably at least, 2 hours of officer time to deal with one shoplifter. Now, when they're prepackaging this, it certainly saves a lot of resources on that, that realm. So that's kind of the, route that we, need to start looking at next, as far as our calls for service, who's generating them, what businesses types are generating more calls for service over others, and then how do we address those, and what are some proactive things that we can be doing to mitigate those problems. Legislative wise, this is the one that we took to legislative committee. There was a hearing on it today at 3 o'clock. There were 0 opponents to this bill. There's a lot of good questions from the legislatures that were there and stuff. Councilmember Yakowicz, Legislator Yakowicz, presented the bill very enthusiastically. So we'll kind of wait and see what comes out of the local. Was that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard Kevin yell from the side room because we were accused of being the Billings. Is this a Billings boy bill? And I think Kevin thought it was a Billings boys band, but no. And that's what there was some, though there were no opponents, there were definitely some questions there. And I think a point that needs to be made from us is that we're trying to get back the public's money. So the public's already spent tax dollars to do this cleanup. So that's just an area we can enhance if we're fortunate enough to get this through committee. So later we'll report on, this is one of the 3 bills I wanted to talk a little bit about later tonight. So,
okay. So I'll keep going. ordinances, Tina kind of touched on, a couple ordinances that she would like, to have changed. And part of our nuisance team, discussion was, let's look at some, legislative, let's look at some ordinance issues. What should we be looking at? What would make it easier to do our job? And unfortunately, some of this, the criminal justice system is a process. Is there ways we can speed up that process? Yes, no, but that's where a lot of people's frustration come in, is having to go through the process, whether it be the criminal justice process or the civil process. It's not a short process to do, and I get the frustration that happens out there. But there's a couple ordinances that we would like to address with you guys at some point here, and we'll kind of bring these to you. She indicated, the graffiti ordinance, moving it basically from a municipal infraction versus a misdemeanor case. I think it would be a good move. It just gives, that code enforcement, who's ever bringing those graffiti tickets, just more of that ownership, much easier to deal with. I think, just the speed of those would help. And there's some general language cleanup in that graffiti ordinance that we'd like to bring to you also. Back on the nuisance part, back to the 12-month period for reported graffiti, we want to make a change there. And then we do want to add some things. If you haven't looked at the nuisance ordinance, take a look at it. You got to normally check off 3 boxes on this whole list of things to meet the criteria. So we'd like to add a few things to that, and you see those kind of listed up here, and things that, we would like to have added, just one more checkbox, so that we could get to those 3, because we think that these are the things that people are seeing out there, things that our code enforcement officers can see from the street, and then can take action on it. Similar being said, one of the properties that I addressed at 323, we've got a cooperative property owner that appears to be at this time starting to, at least schedule they've hired a contractor. We're waiting for some weather to have some movement. But again, they've got, 3 check marks, and, we want to work with them to get all those repaired. And I'm a cringe for saying this, but if they get one of those, 2 of those, fixed up, then it doesn't meet our statute or our ordinance, to continue with the code enforcement side of things. So that's where it benefits us. Let's work with these property owners and see if we can get some things done in that area. Montana statutes relating to civil litigation. What I did is just put these up there. I did pass out, or put in the staff memo, the process that kind of has to be gone through, and all these were kind of cited in there. But I just wanted this just for reference, and we kind of touch base, on a couple of them, talking about some things tonight. But if you haven't looked at that process, it's a separate document on the staff memo. It kind of lays out what we have to have in place and how we can move forward with these public nuisance if we're going to take them, a legal action against those properties. And with that, I am done, ready for some questions.
Okay, questions for Kevin. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Speaking about a property on Southgate, that's in Ward 3. That property didn't start off that way, and apparently there has been a lot of changes. I remember back when it was called America, the place to pull off the interstate and eat. It's no longer that place anymore. What is the role of the state in terms of allowing a premises to have a liquor license, have a casino license, fill the place up with a lot of alcohol-fueled activities and no consequences? I would like to also refer to another property that's on Avenue D and around 1600 that has had a tremendous amount of activity. Now, maybe recently, maybe not. But the name of the establishment is very close to what actually happens there. So where's the consequence for the owner who has a casino and liquor license and they allow these things to happen? And apparently state law says they can't or they shouldn't. So what are the consequences there? I think to a certain extent we're bearing the brunt of the state not taking on its responsibility to hold owners accountable for what activity is happening in their establishment. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Joy, that was a lot. So shorter answer is yes. We've got Department of Revenue, the gambling division, office here in Billings. I think it's called the BPD Retirement South. So we have very good connections there. And that'll be one of those, people that we bring in and talk to. Is there anything that they can do to help us out there? And our street crimes unit, it's a proactive unit. They're looking at these things, too, along with us. But as a nuisance property team, that's one area, yes, we want to look at. Is there anything that they can do, to help us out, from a state perspective and their liquor license and gambling license? Because if we can hit people in the pocketbooks, that's when things will change. Okay. So yeah, your observations aren't going unnoticed.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rowan, Councilmember Neese?
I would hate to disappoint since you baited me into asking you questions. So I appreciate the ordinance recommendations. And I also agree that it's better to have people cooperative than just try to go through a process. But sometimes the propensity for cooperation depends on the severity of the penalty. Right? The more likely I am to have something enforced against me, the more cooperative I get because I don't want to have that happen. And so I would urge this team to look at our ordinances, the thing that we have the most amount of control over, our ordinances, and determine whether or not we could be more robust, not because we just want to take them to court, but because we want to induce that cooperation. We want the penalty to be severe enough. And that's why I really do think we should have another conversation at a different time about treating property owners who operate a facility where they are knowingly allowing drug use to go on as an offense against a property. I get that the people involved in the distribution are going to have offenses against the person. I got that. But there is federal law against operating a drug house. There are states and there are municipal ordinances that say it is an offense against property. It is a public nuisance if you knowingly operate a house where drug use is going on all the time. And it gives us another tool to go after people where we often see, some of our tougher motels where the owners know that this is a place where drug use is happening ongoing and notoriously they do nothing to clean it up. So instead of just going after the people engaged in the crimes, which needs to happen, you go after the owners as well. And I just think we should have a conversation about it. That wasn't a question, other than do you agree?
Yeah. Well, I'll paraphrase for you. You want a bigger stick, and then let's nibble on the carrot a little bit. So
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
I just had one tiny little follow-up, sorry.
Okay, sure.
You said that Southgate Drive was the 34th highest property call? Is that what you said?
34th, 35th, yeah.
So-
Calls for service.
Are the others all big box stores thefts, or like what's going on with the other,
The other 49 properties are.
the ones above,
up.
higher on the list?
Yeah, I mean, it runs a gamut. I mean, you've got your Walmarts, the jail's popping up. So, I mean, some of them you have to, discount right off the bat. You got your Walmarts, you got your, some of your gas stations for thefts, trespasses, things of that nature. A lot of your big box stores, are on there. And then we've got some motel chains.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick clarification on some of the reporting you do. So, for instance, when 824 Dorothy, when someone calls in on that, if they're calling in because of trespass on their property, which is not 824, does that show up in the number for 824, or do you, when you see it, when you notice a property that has an issue, do you then expand it a little bit around the neighbors to aggregate all of it into one number?
So the data I showed you tonight was an aggregate of 2 addresses there.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that helps, thank you. And the other question I have as far as the drug houses, I think you have Riverstone Health on there. Why do you have them on there? I guess my thought in there is, are you using them to say, well, we have to look at a facility that's not healthy for inhabitability, and they deem it, a nuisance, and so you're going to condemn it that way? Is that kind of what they're in there? Can they not do that for houses that are known to be used as drug houses or motels, to test and find out that, yeah, these are not inhabitable?
So, we have a regular attendee from Riverstone Health that's been assigned, to this team. And again, it's just working together, but they get calls all the time. This place is infested with cockroaches, such and such. They can go inside, and check out some of that stuff. And again, it's just one more source. And then, part of that training education for our team is, okay, if you're inside, are there windows boarded up, on the inside? on a, apartment structure, can people get out if there's a fire? They can be our eyes and ears inside of some of these places, reporting more details. And one of the things that I know our legal department is frustrated with when they do file suit is getting witnesses to show up, when they go to trial. So, this is just one more layer that they can add, to a case if we need to, build a case against a certain property or things like that. Different arm, different things that they deal with than what we deal with. But again, we can help each other, if we're seeing some of the same properties, they've been inside and they can report things to us. On the Southgate property, it's if they're serving food. Riverstone Health is an in for me if they're serving food there. And seeing what's going on in that address. They're not, so that's not an avenue we can look at. But there are certain things that they bring to the table that we can't, and then we can provide them some information that maybe they haven't heard before.
So quick follow-up on that. So if we're dealing with property, not people, and Riverstone Health goes in there and sees something, an issue, can we then, do we even have the right to address that because it's beyond the right-of-way where we wouldn't necessarily have it because of now Riverstone Health happened to see that and they're not part of the city?
So the answer to your question is yes, we can use that. Because it's back to that legal needs a witness, somebody that's seen these things, that whatever that might be in the interior. If we got, doors nailed shut, fire escapes nailed shut, things like that we're not seeing from the outside, but they've been in there, for whatever reason and can, testify or can witness something like that, then yes, that does help us.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we call this item a wrap? Councilmember Purington.
So, just so you know, under that ordinance slide, that's the one where it's abandoned and decaying structures. So on the boarded doors, see, it's add broken or boarded windows under conditions to abandon or decaying structures. Why can you not add doors to that also, even if there is someone in there? Anyway, just food for thought. Okay, so the other one is, on some of these properties, Kevin, because I know that the fire department is on this as well, even if it is a residential, can the fire department, can the fire marshal not go in there to make sure that it is up to code?
So if I understand correctly, the answer, the simple answer is no, that they cannot automatically just go into a residential, place and say, well, you don't have your smoke detector up and, whatever that might be. But when you look at residential structures, multiple units and stuff, common areas and things like that, yes, they have access to. And I don't know if there's any more you want to add to that or.
So another question, Mr. Mayor. So I noticed, I think it was in the paper this morning, where Casper, Wyoming is actually dealing with commercial properties and these calls for service to places that serve alcohol. And that was a big category just for that one. In your database, are you breaking it down into that type of establishments?
Yes, bars, or casinos are one of those. And when I do my frequency report on this, I've got kind of 2 casinos that are kind of hitting the list and 2 bars. And, and you look at the amount that we have in Billings, so.
Gotcha. So this is a question also, I think for Karen. No, I don't remember. This is a question for Karen. Because you're the one that kind of came up with, when you were transferring the boxes over to Stillwater, that you found that that the city had actually pursued these abatements. And did you ever find out why we stopped?
Didn't give me a microphone that worked. I did not find out why we stopped filing those in district court. We did for a while, and we've resumed that practice here recently with what's been filed.
Okay, let's call this good. But Just a quick one, the possible change to a municipal infraction on the graffiti cases from misdemeanor. That's a little counterintuitive to reduce the penalty to stop something. Is this only applying to the requirement to remove graffiti, or is this the graffiti artist? And I assume the point is to make it easier to make sure there's a greater certainty of punishment. It doesn't matter so much what the consequences are if you never apply it. So, but can you tell us more about that item?
Yeah, Mayor, I believe this refers to the property owner. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so they didn't put it up, they just haven't removed it. Okay, thank you for that permission. Okay, thanks very much, Kevin, appreciate it. Council, we are 25 minutes past our usual break time, and I thank all of the presenters who stuck around. Is there anything else the council wants before we release our, we give an opportunity for public comment on this item? Okay, so we're going to open for public comment on this item, and then I think we'll probably be done. So whoever's first, please, 3 minutes, and give us your name.
Jacqueline Garcia, Dorothy Lane. I have a question. So under the public nuisance 458111 that Sean talked about months ago, it says a public nuisance means a premises where persons gather for the purpose of engaging unlawful conduct. A condition that renders dangerous for passage of any public highway, that doesn't count. There's a couple more in there. But how does it get taken care of? You talk about public nuisance, we see, you see the calls from Dorothy Lane, just 2 homes, that's not including my home. I don't see what they're doing to enforce these type of public nuisance problems. Yes, the problem with people coming on our property is they are different every time because it is a drug house. We know it's a drug house, the DEA has admitted it's a drug house, the Drug Crimes Task Force has, everyone knows it's a drug house. Doesn't these public nuisance laws pertain to that? Because I can't afford to go get a lawyer and sue him. I mean, let's be honest, and what am I gonna sue him? Because his clients are coming on my property? Whenever the cops go to his house, he always has the same response. I don't know who it is. We have video proof of him leaving our house, going by my neighbor's house, and then going to his house. But he will still say, I don't know who it is. And of course, the officers are awesome, but they can't force him to say, oh yeah, I know who that is. When they've done hits and runs in front of his house, there's actually 2 hit and runs that were not on the slide. There was 2 hit and runs on the same trailer by 2 totally different trucks. There were 3 incidences of fireworks. And there's, the numerous other things that obviously go on there, blocking traffic so you can't drive through our little street. But this says known activity, he's known. So how can we enforce that as part of the public nuisance initiative? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Kevin Nelson, 4235 Bruce Avenue. Well, it's not speeding. It's damn racing. You got these people out here that are knowingly, intentionally, and deliberately modifying their cars to race in this town. You really think these cars are just hitting a little 35 mile an hour little fender bender in the street? Hell no, we're damn totaling cars, killing people on a pretty consistent basis. These aren't just little infractions. These people are out there, they know exactly what they're doing. But also, we have the damn laws to put a stop to a lot of this, but we have no enforcement on this. We got these out there with their mufflers out there. Let's see how much damn noise we can make. Let's see how damn fast we can go. And let's see how damn fast we can go through the red light. And until there's some damn enforcement, we're going to continue with the problem. The downtown group, they've been complaining about traffic calming as longer than you guys have ever been around here. Way, way back. They've been complaining about that. And then for your city attorney to go file a civil action. No, we pay damn taxes because we expect you guys to show up and take care of the problem. We don't want a civil action. They take years and $20,000 left for some no-good dirtbag piece of trash with a damn rap sheet 10 miles long. What's he going to do with it? Most likely he'll take the damn summons and burn your house down with it. The problem is the person that makes the call, his life turns into a living hell. And I've got the stories. And we've got people sitting in the room know damn well what I'm talking about. Oh, if you want a solution, I think it's comical. It's sort of entertaining. You ever watch Fridays with Frank? Pinell County Sheriff YouTubes his traffic videos. He's got a personality, so it works well. But he actually is out. He puts it on YouTube. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we stopped you. Here's the reasons. Sort of interesting. It sort of gives you somebody's going to go in Billings say, oh, damn, I got picked up on King. My buddy got picked up on King. He's on YouTube, and here's what his infraction was, and here's his fine and his ticket and his warrant and everything else. Maybe it's a solution. I wouldn't know. But I think there's a huge problem, and there's just this racing in town is just pathetic, and everyone knows it. When they trespass their damn noise onto my property, now we have a problem. Because my right to my enjoyment, my personal property is now infringed because these dirtbags have been allowed to knowingly do this. How many of, unless you guys all live in a cave, how many of you showed up on a stoplight with the diesel pickup guy first in line? How big a cloud of smoke is he going to blow you, and how far down the street is he going to get? Doing 80. It happens every day. But no enforcement, because he does it every damn day, because there's no enforcement. Thanks.
Thank you. Next.
Sean Callahan, Dorothy Lane, Mayor Council. I was wondering if maybe one of you guys can help me out. I know she doesn't work for the public, she works for you guys. With the amount of calls we saw on there for that Dorothy Lane, with him being out on bond, with the continued drug offenses, calls, whatever's going on over there, how come we're not revoking his bond and putting him back in and stopping all these man hours and taxpayer money is going down the garbage and down the drain? I can't get the answers. No one wants to respond to me and talk to me, so maybe 1 out of 10 of you guys can ask that question and see where we get. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on item number 1? Don't see any, so we will close that. Appreciate Councilor Purinton.
Just a quick question. With regard to Dorothy Lane, there was a comment that you made that they were looking for something in a mailbox. So isn't that a postal inspector thing? Can you call the postal inspector? I mean, I don't know how that works. They'd be sitting out there forever probably because there's not always something in the mailbox. But isn't that a federal offense?
So I'll have to defer to you, say, John. I don't believe that they will take that enforcement, but I could be wrong.
Council member, that wouldn't be something the postal member or a postal inspector's interested in. In fact, when we have theft out of mailboxes, letters, things like that on small occurrences, they have us charge it locally. Bigger stuff they get involved in. As far as putting something in the mailbox and leaving it, And they might be interested in it, depending on what it is. The postal inspector is assigned and works with our drug task force, so they're in the middle of that. But generally, they're not interested in minor stuff.
Okay, don't go anywhere. Chris?
So Mayor, along this line, and Kevin or you, Chief, I'm thinking one of the slides that Kevin showed, we didn't stop or park on this issue, but am I recalling right, there were 5 arrests made between those 2 properties as well. So when there's arrests made, can you walk us through, maybe they answer the question relative to we make the arrest,
Yeah, Mayor and Council, we are just a small part of the criminal justice system. We investigate crimes, we're fact finders, we make arrests, and then refer it on to the respective attorney's office, depending on whether it's misdemeanor or felony. They prepare the charges, they get the case in front of the judge makes a sentence. So, having somebody getting their bond revoked, that is not police department's job. That would come from a respective judge. Again, we don't have any control over that. The fact, a lot of the numbers that you saw that were referred to, the city attorney's office, the ones that we were involved in, the ones with the public nuisance, we are responding and making arrests and getting people referred where they need to be. The other discussion that we've had is the capacity issues in the criminal justice system. The residents on Dorothy Lane are experiencing that firsthand. The capacity issues are limiting what it is that the judge can or will do with one particular individual. That's not our issue. That is the judge and the criminal justice system on the back end.
Okay. Hey, Chief, while we've got you, I am looking at the public nuisance statute, the state statute, not the local city ordinance, but the state statute. And there's no doubt that using a property for illegal purposes, including a drug house, so to speak, is a proper basis for bringing a nuisance claim, specifically where persons, quote, gather for the purpose of engaging in lawful conduct. So in the case of Dorothy Lane, unlawful conduct is not suspected unlawful conduct. It's not illegal conduct on a different property or coming to somebody else's property from that other house, but actual unlawful conduct on the nuisance property. There has been unlawful conduct on the problem property, but ballpark, can you tell us how much or what? And it has to have been proven. We can't bring a nuisance claim in 2023 and say, hey, 6 months ago something happened. That's not proven unlawful conduct. But what is the proven unlawful conduct on the problem house on Dorothy Lane, as best you can remember? I'm not expecting, chapter and verse and dates, but.
Yeah, certainly, Mayor. Well, of course, it goes to, for us being able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, we have to have definitive evidence that a crime took place. So we either have to witness it, we have to have a witness that will testify to that. The times that we have been there and made arrests, that has happened, and the system has worked. Some of the situations that garner the frustration of the neighbors is that while we all know what's going on or what has gone in that house, just go in and make arrests. We cannot do that. And so we need to have that definitive proof, whether, like I said, whether we see it, whether we have direct evidence, and we get a lot of that information. I view this as a cumulative type thing, and the report that Mr. Iplin showed you is just that. You're starting to build a case for the public nuisance based on the number of calls. Now, how many of those can we substantiate as irrefutable criminal activity? A handful of those. At the end of the day, we're going to have to lean on our legal counsel as to, do we have enough here to go or not? It's not something that we're going to make an arrest on site.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. Oh, I open it as, okay. I'm sorry. Can we make it real short? Everybody's been extremely patient, real short.
Real short, I think that's one of the things when I first started studying public nuisance is that you do have that definitive number, how many calls were made where criminal activity was actually charged, I guess. And so I think that, and that number out there, well, we had significant or we had however many, it has to be definitive. So that may be part of what Councilmember Owen is saying. This is how we add some structure into our ordinance. I don't know how that plays out. If someone else is arrested coming out of that house because of drug activity, I don't know why these people were arrested. So I don't know how that plays into making the case more solid.
Thank you, Espinosa.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think I want to maybe pose a question to our city attorney, you, Chief, of what was asked here. If you have an individual who is going through the court system now and they're out on bond, and then you have this nuisance happening in the property, and yet we're not documenting it, we're not charging them for the nuisance. If we were to have an ordinance that says after X number of calls or X number of types of whatever violations that are happening at that property, we then would file a municipal charge against them or against the property, would that not go into the court system to then possibly cause them to revoke their being out on bail? Does that make sense, or am I again, I don't know the legal system. I've been far away from it. But can you answer that?
Yeah, there's no numbers in that question, so I know you're kind of struggling with that. So.
Thank you.
But you're absolutely right. And those are things that trigger us referring a probationer or parolee to their parole officer, getting them in the system. The thing that we're struggling with now, and Councilmember Purrington has heard some of this, is that the judges tend to want to, if somebody's on probation or parole, and we make an arrest and we just, on a new charge, they want the new charge to play out before they do anything with the existing probation and parole. So that's why we have people languishing in jail on some of the state charges. So we're trying to work with the judges to go, come on, let's handle these things all at the same time. You don't need to wait for the new charge, which is going to get a new public defender, a new court date, and extend things out. And so whether it is a municipal infraction all the way up to a new felony, those things get reported, and then it's the judge who revokes the status.
So if I understand you
That's
correctly.
in place right now.
Okay, and so I think what we need to do then is make sure that we come up with a process that helps with that. So because right now we have nothing in process other than we're tracking all this data, which is good. But I think what I understand is we probably have to have a policy where it says, okay, this is where it crosses the line, and this is where it crosses the line of being a nuisance and infraction of the ordinance, and then that is when they have to file a charge. Do I understand that correctly?
That'd be certainly helpful with the nuisance side of things. I will tell you, it'd be redundant with reporting people to get them in, because we do that now. We work any violations, any problematic behavior, we are reporting to the parole officers, and then they do what they do. Sometimes they revoke, sometimes they don't, and then, of course, it's got to get in front of a judge as well.
Right, I just think we need to make sure that this is part of that charges as well, so if that's happening, then we can charge it.
It is happening. Any additional teeth to the nuisance side of things, I think would be most helpful.
Right, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience. It is 8:12. We'll come back no later than 8:20 and hopefully a little bit before. Casey, and also you're the brains of the operation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. This is Anne Marie Overcash. She joined us full-time now as the DES coordinator in the department, and truly the brains of the outfit. So if you haven't had an opportunity to meet Anne Marie, she's a double master's degree, emergency management, homeland security. She spent the last few years working with her father doing military-style communication stuff. So a great asset to the team, and I certainly welcome her here. I told the mayor right before I got up here, I've now forgotten what I was going to talk about. Thank you all, and for the council members that I haven't had the privilege to meet and converse with. I am Casey Williams. I am your city emergency manager as well as the emergency manager for Yellowstone County. What I'm going to talk about today is just I haven't spoken with you in a while, a reiteration of emergency management, the processes that we go through, and ultimately what your role is in the emergency management process. So we'll get started here. Emergency management, what do? Well, we've heard a lot from our public safety entities, and they go to calls as they come through 911 and things like that. It's my job in emergency management to facilitate, coordinate, and support any of those emergency situations that the individual entity can't deal with by itself. So we support calls, we coordinate calls, we come up with our emergency plans, our hazard mitigation plans. We identify all the hazards and threats that are possible to the community. And what I like to say, the purpose of these two pictures is every aircraft that has ever taken off landed. That's for certain. If you take off, you're going to land. And that kind of goes to emergencies and disasters. Every emergency and disaster that we have ever had in the history of humankind has come to an end. It's my job, with cooperation from you guys, to make sure that we land somewhere between a perfect landing and the one on the right, the catastrophic landing, because we really can't control a lot of the bad things that happen. What we do have some control over is the cost, the expediency, the loss of life, and the loss of property resulting in how we respond and recover from all those disasters. So it's ultimately my job, along with y'all's job, to see that we stick the landing a little bit and it doesn't just become catastrophic, economic loss, etc. We're currently under a process of redoing our hazard, THIRA, our threat and hazard mitigation plan. That'll be completed by the end of this year. Part of that process, we have to look at and brainstorm and come up with everything we can think of that could possibly go wrong here. These are some of the issues that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, that we plan for, that we respond to, etc. We have planned and unplanned events like the fair, the air show that's coming up, Live After 5, some of the festivals we have downtown. Those are some of the planned events. The unplanned events, we've had the largest vehicle crash in Montana history here. We have rail cars that we have to worry about. Of course, we have fire risks that we have to worry about. And most of these things have occurred in or around our community here in Montana. We also have to deal with natural disaster type things, severe weather, tornadoes, floodings, earthquakes, rock slides. And the fact that I hear, oh, that'll never happen here. All of these things have happened here and do happen here on a fairly regular basis, actually. We have our hazmat issues, and the thing that's going on right now in Ohio is a horrible reminder of how bad a hazmat situation could get. One of the things that it reminds me of is they've had for 2 weeks a 1 mile mandatory evacuation from the scene. We have, according to BNSF, approximately 80,000 hazmat cars that cross 27th Avenue every month. There are thousands of those around, but if we had to evacuate a 1 mile area away from the biggest repository of hazmat, that would shut down pretty much everything in downtown Billings, and that reaches all the way into the medical corridor. Obviously, it affects the continuity of operation of both the county and the city governments. So things to think about. When we do my job, when we work, we spend about 1/5 of the time in response. Response is actually the easiest and the shortest part of all of emergency management. The rest of it is in prevention and mitigation and protection, preparedness, and then recovery. For an example, I'm still doing paperwork and still having regular conversations with FEMA over the flooding event that we had last June. We are still not closed out on some of the things COVID related that began in 2020, March the 20th. So that recovery piece and the preparedness, the prevention, and the mitigation are where I spend most of my time, but that's also where the city council, our elected officials, and administration have the biggest impact and the biggest job. So one of the things that we do when we have a bad day is we worry about these community lifelines: safety, security, food and shelter, healthcare, energy. Every time we have something bad that goes on, it negatively affects one of those. And we'll use the event that's happening in Ohio right now. That affected their water, their sewer, their transportation route, their energy route, their communications because of how they had to evacuate and how they're having to communicate, and obviously hazardous materials. That brings together many, many city, county, state resources. Their elected officials are chest deep in dealing with this, trying to take care of a community and still maintain the functionality of that community, the economic loss, et cetera. We experienced a lot of that during COVID. We experienced a very small sliver of it during our flood. Our neighbors in Carbon County and Stillwater County will be dealing with the massive negative effects of that flood for several years to come. But these are the community lifelines that myself and Anne Marie worry about every day. How can we maintain and keep these things running even in the event of a bad day? So when we talk about our incident command and when we talk about how we deal with things here in Yellowstone County and in Billings, we respond to disasters in 4 different levels. The incident command system, which is the boots on the ground. Those are the firefighters, the police, the EMS, the public works, those people that are out dealing with the problem. The Emergency Operations Center is where I live, and that is the place where we gather subject matter experts to facilitate, coordinate, and support the project. In that EOC is a multi-agency coordinating group. These are groups that are all federally defined, by the way, and that's the group that you live in. So when we open up our EOC for any type of an emergency or disaster, one of the pieces of that is the multi-agency coordination group, and that includes the elected leadership, the mayor, the administrator, whether it be for the county, the city, or a combination thereof. And then we have a joint information system, which is how we pass information between ourselves internally and externally to the public. So all of these things are points that we work on, that we try to improve on, that we need to invest a little bit more of our time and sometimes resources in. I know that the city is graciously, thanks to you guys, helping us build a functional EOC, that Emergency Operations Center, where we can get everybody together if we have a bad day and manage things and have good transfer of knowledge. So it'll be a really good day in Billings and for Yellowstone County and actually our surrounding neighbors when we get a good working functional EOC. We have not had one of those ever. So thank you, council, for allowing that to be built into the plan at Stillwater Building. So now we'll get into the senior leadership and y'all's roles and responsibilities. Some of the responsibilities that you guys have is, one of the big ones is ensuring that continuity of government. Now, MCA defines the cessation of responsibility if somebody leaves a job for whatever reason, who takes over and who takes over. What I'm talking about here is the continuity of government. In the event that something were to happen and it shuts down our infrastructure, this building, for instance, or all of our IT structures, how does this government continue to provide service to the public just like we do now? The alternate location, the alternate systems, the backup systems, that's your job, one of the responsibilities you have. How do we request assistance from a state? You have to declare a state of emergency for the city of Billings, and when do you do that? And it is your job to participate in the multi-agency coordination group when and if a disaster or a declaration of emergency has been declared, or we open up the EOC and need policy members to come in and help us make certain decisions. And I think I'm hitting the button. There we go. Oh, man, I used really good font there. That's really good, isn't it? Some of the decisions that administration and you guys make are things like when or where to evacuate, whether to declare a disaster, setting the priorities. So when we have an incident action plan that deals with a major deal, and we'll take an hazmat spill because it's all in the news, you guys help to set the overarching priorities of that. You help to identify where we utilize limited resources to help us prioritize what resources are going to be used where. You are the ones who can make emergency decisions on, do we need to spend money to do this, or do we not need to spend money to do that? All of those decisions are decisions that come out of that coordinating group. Altering policy, you were talking about, do we need to come up with different ordinances to help with some of the abatement and some of the nuisance properties? That's another. Maybe there's some emergency ordinances or things that we need to do, or that we need to put aside so that we can get some work done. That all comes from you guys. This is just a definition of the multi-agency coordination group. It serves as the policy level body during incidents. You're always there. You're part of the organizational structure of our Emergency Operations Center and of the Emergency Operations Plan. You're out here in a box with dotted line over to the incident commander and the emergency management director managing the EOC. During the incidents, y'all will meet to set the major priorities of the team, and you will be making some of the high-level policy and budgetary decisions. Again, I will know next time not to use red, as that seems to not be a very good color for this. You do the emergency declarations. Y'all have done some emergency declarations in the past. We did one for COVID. We did not do an emergency declaration for the flood, or did we? We did. We did the emergency. I was in the Bahamas. So that particular, the line of succession, price controls, procurement, that kind of things. We'll get on something we can read. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the resources we have. Montana, as a state, is a very resource-limited state. Obviously, we only have about a million plus people in the state. It's spread out over an area that is, one of the top 5 largest geographic areas in the country. And the state Department of Emergency Services does not have an operational arm. So I can't call the state and say, hey, we need a whole bunch of hazmat cleanup stuff. They don't have it. They are a state coordination center. So what they would do is help to try to make phone calls to find that kind of stuff, but they don't have it. And we don't have it here locally. We have a local, like for instance, a local hazmat team that can deal with small events. The Billings Fire Department houses the regional hazmat team that the governor can say, please go somewhere and do something. But again, they have very, very limited resources, and we rely on relationships with the energy companies, with the rail industry, with the pipeline industries to help support those type of things. And it goes on with urban search and rescue. It goes on with mutual aid for large fires, for large policing activities, you name it. There's just not a lot. So locally, we have our volunteer organizations. The two that are most active that everybody knows about are the Red Cross and the Salvation Army. They're very good and active participants in our emergency management program. We have several local NGOs. Those are some of the religious groups and some of the other non-governmental organizations that help us out. Most of these, like the United Way, they help us out with people. Sometimes they help us out with sheltering and food, but really they too are very limited in the resources that we have locally. So what do we have to do? We have to ask for resources that come from outside our community. We can do that with a declaration of emergency. It has to go through the local DES office because that's the way Montana is set up. And we ask the state for that type of an assistance, and the state can enact mutual aid agreements for us. They can give what little state resources that they have. The state, when they get tapped out, and our state gets tapped out pretty quick, can request the president to declare a disaster or an emergency, and we can get federal funding. Or they can also ask for an EMAC, which is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. If y'all may or may not know, Florida had the big Hurricane Ian. The state of Florida governor asked the other governors around the country, can we have help through this EMAC? And EMAC is a program that every state is required to participate in. Our governor answered the call and sent a 10-member team, myself included, down to Florida to help with some of their hurricane incident management and take some of the burden off of them as they were going through the first 14 days of Hurricane Ian. And we also receive help when our governor asks for an EMAC thing. So we can get, that's how we get resources from out of the state. All in all, though, all of that requires city administration and the city elected officials to be engaged and be a part of that whole system, because without your approval and without your declarations, we can't actually go and get any of this stuff. I want to stay on this just for a moment, and I put it into the memo that I sent out. I'm the NIMS coordinator for Yellowstone County and all of the incorporated and non-incorporated areas, and as such, it is my job, required job, to make sure that I offer and keep up with all of the city officials, elected officials, first response agencies, and certain others that have NIMS training, so that you're trained on the National Incident Management System. That's a federal law. There's several laws that go into that, but it is my job to at least offer that type of training to you guys, and I hope to set some of that up so that we have 2 or 3 opportunities throughout the course of this next calendar year. FEMA has helped because they have now come up with, and it's been around for a little while, a class for elected and appointed officials that gives you the ICS and NIMS training necessary so that you have a better understanding of how you fit into the cog, what your roles are and what your responsibilities are. So I'm hoping that I can get all of that set up so that we can offer that locally for you guys and give you some opportunities to take that training. It's very important. You can also go online, obviously, to FEMA and take lots of classes or attend any of the classes that we have for any of our first responders. I highly encourage you guys to do that. More and more often, we keep having record-breaking and worst-case scenario, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And with the civil threats that we have in a growing community, and with the other natural and unnatural hazards that we keep identifying in our community, I think that it would be best practice for everybody who's involved in that system to have at least a base level knowledge of how you would interact and where you would go and what you would do in certain situations like that. I have not been able to teach it yet because FEMA changed the rules, and all of the classes that I've had, I've even been a college instructor of this for years. I had to retake my classes to have the 2019 version before I could teach you guys the new one. Even though I've spent decades teaching that, it's a new rule. Got to go through a class to teach the class that I used to teach a year ago. So we'll have that coming up for you, and I highly encourage everybody to do that. One of the other things that we do in our department is we seek out and try to find any kind of grant opportunities that we can have that would help us mitigate, protect, plan for, sometimes respond to. These are 24 of the identified grants that I either pursue in our department personally or encourage other departments to do it. And things like the Assistance to Firefighter Grant for equipment and vehicles for the fire department, the SAFER Grant for hiring firefighters, some of the nonprofit grants for some of the NGOs, and I encourage those to go. I can't apply for them, but we do encourage people to do that. We do go with the Emergency Management Performance Grant and the Homeland Security Grant every year. But these are just 24 of the grants that I keep my eye on, and I try to send out the notifications of funding whenever those come out. Is the BRIC? Yeah, there it is. That's the new hazard mitigation grant. The grants that we've had in the last 12 months have, if you include ARPA, because some of the ARPA funding is DES managed isn't the right word, but you have to go through DES to get some of the ARPA funding because that's how our state is set up. But we've had, in the last 12 months, last year we had 130,000. This year we have 130,000. In our next fiscal year, we've been qualified for 130,000 in the EMPG grant. We've applied for and received $337,000 worth of Homeland Security grant last year. 337 the year before, 445 last year. We have $1.12 million applied for this year. Those are competitive grants. They're hard to get, but we've been successful in getting almost $1 million over the last 2 years, so I feel comfortable on that. As everybody knows, we've applied for the BRIC grant twice, both times for $50 million for the water treatment plant. Didn't get it. These are competitive and highly political. So one of the things about grants, if you hear that we are applying for a grant or anything around the city that's grant-wise, any political connections you have to the state and federal representatives and senators is very, very important in moving some of those forward. All in all, in the last 12 months, probably now 14 to 16 months, we've been awarded $21,913,400 approximately in grant money to do emergency management related type stuff, whether it's mitigation, planning, prevention. Some of the things we're doing out at the Metro Park, we were able to get in ARPA because of how we applied for that and worded the grants. The ditch companies that we have locally that provide irrigation water have been able to get hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of competitive grants to help with some of their mitigation processes. And of course, we have public assistance from the flood that added into that too. But we do try our best to do some of those grant applications, and I encourage the city council, when you're looking for funding mechanisms, to always consider, is there a grant for it? Keeping in mind, of course, that some of the grants are a year or two out, so you apply for it and it delays your project, but still something to think about. And the city administration and the police department, fire department, they're all really good about thinking about that, but I would also encourage you guys to think about those things as well.
Okay.
So I was told keep it quick, so I tried to keep it quick. But I would like to address any questions that you may have, or any questions
Looks like
you
we've got
might
some.
have.
Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Saturday, I'm sitting at 27th and First Avenue North, and I'm thinking of you because there's a train in front of me. I realized I was at ground zero, thinking of Ohio. The engine went past me and was probably at Shiloh by the time the end came by, but it was smoking. It was really moving. So my concern is, how much control do we really have over a major industry like the railroad who could destroy our town in like that?
Very, very little control over the railroads. The railroads in the United States have enormous power and control, and they own the easements and the right-of-ways and the tracks. So there's nothing really we're going to do to move the track or keep the hazmat cars from coming. What we can do is make sure that we have good plans in place for when, because we've had derailments out here before, it just didn't round up in a spill. When we have a bad day, we have a plan in place to communicate that and make sure that our responders are safe and we can react to it quickly. And I think one of the gaps that we have is we also need to make sure that we have a continuity of operations plan for the city government. I think we need to have continuity of operations plans, or at least encourage them, for the private businesses that are out there, because one of the things that hurt everybody with COVID was they shut down the businesses, and even though you may have insurance to cover certain business losses, most of them don't have a plan on how they're going to survive a long-term shutdown. But those are one of the things. We also happen to be in a city that is built in a manner that a major structure fire downtown has the potential of going really, really bad and burning down several buildings all at once because of the proximity. But the continuity of operations plan and then our ability to recover quickly is really all we can do about that.
Thank you. Councilmember Bernice, Councilmember Purinton.
Thank you, Mayor. Got a couple of questions for you. I think you said the EOC, we're going to be building, I think it's in the new City Hall, if I remember correctly. The current one is in the Fire Station 1?
No, sir.
There is
So
none?
our current one was temporarily on the fourth floor of the Stillwater building. Now that construction has started, we have temporarily moved our primary EOC to the Board of County Commissioners boardroom and the two adjacent meeting rooms. Our backup plan would be to go to the next feasible location that had the space and the IT requirements to pull that off, if for some reason we couldn't use the Stillwater building at all.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I think, I don't know what the most threatening hazard would be in the city, but looking at Ohio, where you've got a mile of you have to be evacuate, I think our EOC is downtown, and if something happened downtown like that, then we wouldn't be able to use that. So I'm not so sure maybe that's the best place for it now that we are located near a hazardous spot. But my other question, because I ask you this every time, is how is our code red acceptability or placement going throughout the city? Have you had any stats lately as far as how people are actually loading it, using it on their phone?
So we have approximately, give or take a little bit more, because it changes. Some people sign up, some people don't, around 15,000 subscribers. And we still do not use Code Red for anything other than emergency notifications. A best practice with any notification system, whether it's Code Red, Everbridge, Java, any of the ones that you can use, all of them also have the opportunity and the ability to put out messaging that's not emergency. And in communities that use that function and create those groups, they get much better buy-in as far as signing up for it. So 15,000, while it's not as near as good as what I would like for it to be, it's better than it was when we started. It's continuously growing, but it's growing very small and very slowly. And I don't think we do the best job that we can of marketing it. I market it, but that's kind of about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen any tests lately, so I don't know if you're even doing the test or if it's
We
even
do,
working.
every month on the first, we do a test.
Then mine must not be working, so I better do something about it.
So every month we do that test, and then every month I do the required federal test for our IPAWS system.
Okay.
Just for the council and everybody, you have to have a system like Code Red or any other vendor that does a system like Code Red. There's like 20 of them that you have to have that in order to have IPAWS. And IPAWS is the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System that the federal government has. So we have to have it in order to have IPAWS. The subscription base would be a lot better because with the Code Red, you can better geolocate your warnings so that it doesn't go over quite as wide of an area and be more specific.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pearson?
Thank you, Casey. So I had a few questions, and I think maybe, don't we have a council operations committee or
Yes.
something like that? So I'm just thinking, I don't know that we've had this type of coordination that you're asking about, but that might be a place to put that, is under the council operations committee to coordinate with Chris and you and, however that would work. Because there were several times that it mentioned in this, on page 9, page 14, I think there were a couple others, where it talked about the MAG group and council. And right now, I know council's not ready for any of that, because we don't know anything. And I don't know if administration knows anything. So I'm just saying that I think your suggestions are well taken. Having 2 refineries in the downtown area as well as the railroad that goes through, I think that would be just something that we should put on a higher priority for public safety than where it is now, which I think now it's kind of non-existent, at least in my world. I know several years ago when our kids were going to Central, I called the county and I said, what sort of plan do you have for the high school if something happens with one of these refineries? And they go, nothing. I'm going, oh, good, okay. Close the windows and cover your nose. I don't know. But, so I think there are a lot of opportunities that, within the city, especially this downtown core, would be very, very reasonable to do that. So when you were down in Florida, did you learn anything organizationally that
Yes.
you brought back here that you're going, oh, we've got to do this?
Yes, I did. And the 2 or 3 things. I'm currently working with, we created an emergency management advisory council that's made up of the first response, police, fire, public works, the mayor, city administration, county elected officials. Part of that group is to get together, discuss the overall big picture of emergency management and help guide me in the way that best suits our community, because you have to have those key stakeholders. So some of the things that came out of going to Hurricane Ian was the realization that when we do have to stand up our emergency operations center, we don't have enough personnel with a minimum level of training to actually pull it off. So we're working through that group to identify individuals who would be willing to get some of the basic training to help fill some of those seats. Because when I went to Florida, I realized what they had there is every county employee was required to go to their emergency operations center for every disaster and fill a seat. But they weren't trained, and they still had to run the business of their own departments while they were doing it, and that's a very, very complicated and bad thing to do. And it cost them hundreds of hours and probably over the course of documentation, millions of dollars. But it was a very strong stress point that they had, and one of the recommendations that we had when we left was clean that up. So we're trying to create an incident management team to work in our EOC anytime we have to activate that, and we're trying to build out 2 to 5 people strong in each position, so we will always have somebody here and available when we have a bad day to organize that. Did that answer the question?
I think so. So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Okay?
So another thing that I thought that you mentioned was with this operation center that you're projecting, how is that impacted by what the county is doing? Because I think you operate in conjunction with the county. And then I'm just going to tell you my one last question also, so you can follow both of them, is that, so all of these millions of dollars that you've been awarded through these grants, where is that money going? And if you do have grants, let us know.
Absolutely. So on the first question, the Emergency Operations Center is for Laurel, Broadview, the city of Billings, and Yellowstone County, because we only have one emergency management department. And through the resolutions, the city's required to have an emergency manager, and you've resolved for it to be this person. And I think from an organizational standpoint and working with the state, that's a wise decision. So the Emergency Operations Center the fact that the city's putting it up there doesn't really affect the county operation at all. We would still use the location. I think ultimately, years down the road, we should either partner with the National Guard, which they want us to do, because geographically the best place for an EOC in this county is up there on the hill by the airport. It gets us away from the most hazards. But that's several years out. So the space that the city and you guys have graciously been able to do is a multifunctional space that we can use as an EOC, but it is also a technologically advanced meeting room. It's a classroom. So if we ever get to a point where we can relocate our EOC and have a permanent one, that space will not be vacated. It is a living space that the city will be able to use for many, many things now, and I guess for your 20 or 30 year plan. Oh, and the money. So for some examples, we got 129,000 of it went for security cameras through Homeland Security out at the Metro. I have 2 portable high definition surveillance trailers that the law enforcement and fire or anybody can use those. As a matter of fact, I think Billings PD or the sheriff's office has one of them in use right now. The other one's currently up at the DNRC. The Bear, the armored vehicle that the city got through the Homeland Security grant is there. $130,000 a year of it goes for the EMPG, which is that pays for half of all of the stuff that emergency management does. Half of our salaries comes out of that grant. The ditch companies have gotten several hundreds of thousands of dollars to do mitigation and repair. I know we're all aware of the BBWA ditch and some of their threats, so they've gone after competitive ARPA funding to help do some lining and mitigation projects there. And the list just keeps on going on and on and on. Most of our grants are most of them are $500,000 to about $250,000, but the sheriff's office got a $800 and something thousand command vehicle one time, so they're all over the place. Does that help?
It does.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, it's 9 o'clock. I think we want to open up for public comment. Let me just, before we do that, make two comments for the benefit of the council. Last week, the Emergency Management Council, which Casey started about a year ago, had a meeting, and one of the main topic of conversation was creating a better notification system for department heads, different levels of government when there is something happening. The immediate trigger was the famous Chinese balloon, which I found out about when I got a call from CNN asking for comment, which is a little embarrassing. I said, what in the hell are you talking about, you know? And because I wasn't watching my Billings Gazette notifications, but that's not how we should find out about things going on. So the dispatch center has existing technology to create those sort of notification trees, and we'll be working on building that up with under Casey's direction. So just sort of an FYI there. The other thing that when COVID happened, I started digging into the state statutes on mayoral powers in the event of an emergency. And I was frankly surprised to find that there are such things. And yet we have a charter form of government, and so it was still unclear to me whether, in the case of our charter, those statutory powers apply or not. And I'm not sure I ever got to a good conclusion about that. But since time is very short in the case of a real emergency, that's one of the things, and I appreciate Councilmember Purington's recommendation that the Council Operations Committee, that might be a place to dig into that. And I think we need better direction from our city attorney's office to ask them to dig into that when we're not in an emergency and put together a good, simple, easy to follow memo that we would have easy access to when time is short. So, and we can look at in advance and think about. So those are two comments. Is there any public comment on item number 2, the DES presentation?
Kevin Nelson, 4235 Bruce Avenue. So thanks on Code Red. I did get my test, but the last notice was on 8/4 of 22. Last August was the last one. It was a fatal wreck on Highway 3, 27 roundabout. My question on Code Red, I don't know is that 24/7? Is someone there? If there was an emergency, would that go out, or does somebody have to sort of go over there and do that? I don't know. But then on a more serious issue, about a month ago, power goes out at our house. So 2:30, 1:30 or so on a Saturday, Sunday, whatever. Okay, power's out. Half hour goes by, hour goes by, 2 hours goes by, 4 hours go by. Northwestern Energy's phone's busy. Finally get to them at 5 o'clock. This has been 4 hours now. You go on to Northwestern Energy outage site, and they show a little dot by Riverstone Health. But the actual incident was a power pole got sheared off on State. But you would think Northwestern Energy or somebody would have put out an alert that said, hey, we got a power outage, and we're going to be out till X. They said 6:30. It actually came on at 7:30, but at least you would have some information. And you would think that would be an emergency that would, in today's technology, we would have, but we didn't get it. You know, a month ago was all right. Tomorrow and Thursday, 6 hours, it's going to be a little different story for some people. If the power went out, at least you would know what to plan for, what to expect, what we're going to do. And there really wasn't anything. Now, I didn't know, wouldn't that be a Code Red issue? That Code Red would have put out an alert, says, hey, we sheared off a power pole on State. There's 800 houses out of power, and we don't expect the power to be back till 7:30? I don't know. I don't know what constitutes an emergency from Code Red. I don't know how many boxes you got to check. But it'd be but that'd be something you think you would know. But like I said, the last Code Red was back in August, and you think we'd had at least one emergency since then, but maybe not. Maybe we're just lucky. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, somebody does have to trigger those. Any other public comment on item number 2? No, so we'll close public comment and any wrap-up, Councilor
Yeah,
Bernice?
just a quick question, because we were talking about the continuity plan. Chris, this is a question for you. Does each of the departments have their own continuity plans and practice them annually? I know when I was working for an office, we, every single year, they basically kind of mock power, the phones would ring to another. I mean, we have to, operate, as if we had no power, stuff like that.
So there certainly are operational plans and emergency preparedness plans. What Casey referenced earlier in increasing that effort over this past year is certainly elevated, a monthly meeting that we have with all the key players. As he said, your public safety departments have done that forever because that's their core responsibility. But other departments like Public Works and other key departments are absolutely now a part of those efforts. As the mayor pointed out, and we saw with the balloon, the communication piece really didn't work the way that it needed to. And thankfully, having the kind of expertise we now have running the 911 center, we've been able to prove that. So the plans exist. I can't tell you they exist in every department, but that interface and communication with them, it's part of why Casey is a part of our tactical meeting that we do each week. He's a part of that once a month to communicate as well as get us together if there's something we need to do better.
Okay, well, I just thought I would ask because I think that's important that every employee from the top to the bottom is actually participating and they know what to do, where to meet, things like that.
Yeah, where do we go in the case of an emergency?
Under the desk.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Just, Councilor Purinton?
Casey addressed what Mr. Nelson's concerns were, because I've heard this before when we first started doing it, but I don't remember the answer to it.
Sure. Yeah, many of us that have code red, we just don't see those alerts.
Right. So, sorry. So with code red, when we send out a code red message, most of the time we geolocate the code red message. Code red is instigated by the fire department, the police department, any elected official, or if 911 says we need to do something like that. Typically, I am not the person that instigates or initiates the code red request. That comes from the incident commander that's on scene that's dealing with something like Chief St. John called when they had the wreck and said, hey, we need you to put out code red for a 1.5 square mile radius from this point. So we did that. With code red, because we can geofence it, just because you have code red, if you're not in the area that is experiencing the problem, you won't get the notification because warning fatigue is something that we don't want to do. And we still do not have good muscle memory of thinking about putting out a code red message. So I'm sure the power outage that was talked about, obviously, we don't want to put a code red message for every time the power goes out everywhere because we would probably be doing that almost daily somewhere. But major power outages would be something that would absolutely be a good thing to put out on code red, but only when we are notified that we have that and have the information to put out a good message. So when things like that, our partners at Northwest Energy, if they don't notify us, we don't know about it because they don't call 911 or so from a public's emergency response agencies, we typically don't know about it. Billings Public Works does a fantastic job with the streets and the sewers and the things that they deal with, but the other energy companies just haven't. We haven't been able to incorporate them into our information network. And that's something that Derek Yeager at the 911 Center that he was alluding to, we're really trying to get and build better capacity on our situational awareness and our ability to communicate internally as well as externally.
Okay, thank you. I think that wraps up then item number 2. For item number 3, Chris, any upcoming agenda items you want to alert us to?
So coming up next week, a lot of consent items, went fully through the alphabet again. But on your action item list, pretty straightforward, nuisance abatement, weed abatement, and then budget amendments. And so a flag there on the budget amendments, when you read the memo, you'll see that the Budget and Finance Committee had an opportunity to review 2 of the 4. They asked for more information. We're going to have a meeting this Friday afternoon to determine and find out if the committee is going to recommend the other 2. So those are your 3 action items for the budget, or I'm sorry, not for the budget, for your agenda 6 days from tonight. The other thing I wanted to flag, which is not next week's agenda, but I thought I'd just touch on 3 particular pieces of legislation. I know it's getting late, but one we already talked about, so I'll be brief about it. House Bill 534, that is former Council Representative Yakowicz, his attempt to move that cap from $9,500 to $25,000. Hearing went, I think, fairly well, although frankly, you don't really have any idea based on what happens in the hearing as to where it'll go. So I reached out to our lobbyist team as well as to the representative to see where do we go from here to help with that. Senate Bill 382. This is an extraordinarily comprehensive set of land use regulatory changes. 47 or 48 pages worth. Been worked on for many, many months. I don't know if it amounts to years. Wyeth gave a 4-page summary. The league gave a 2-page summary. I would encourage you to look at those and then, depending upon your level of interest, how deep you want to dive into the 47 pages. Pretty interesting, I think, in that it's really hard to get comprehensive legislation like this through. And yet there are so many land use and planning type actions taking place in Helena. I think it really behooves us. So the legislative subcommittee will be digging into this a little deeper, but once we get past transmittal next week, I figure we need to highlight, frankly, for all of you, what are the bills that it seems are really worthy of putting our effort into, because frankly, there's so much going on, it's quite overwhelming. But I wanted to flag that. You've gotten the bill, I think, 2 or 3 different ways now from Wyeth. It was included in the information from Montana League of Cities and Towns on that update. So please take a look at that. Senate Bill 262, that's from our local Senator Zolnikoff. It essentially says if you got a license at the state level, it prohibits cities from having licensing requirements. So our work on marijuana, our work on massage, our work in a whole bunch of areas will dissipate. I asked at our community meeting last week, the Zoom call that we do, what's the intent there? To Daniel's credit, he didn't, hey, it's a difference in philosophy. They really see it as a duplication of government. And so I just ask you that I asked Tina this earlier to Councilmember Boyette's question. 4 years ago, I don't know if we had 6 or 8, you all knew there were illicit massage businesses in Billings, Montana. I don't think anybody in town really didn't know they existed. Today, they're not all closed, but they are mostly closed. I asked Tina, how many do you think we have today? I think we're really down to just a couple that are out in the open, that we know there are things that go on underground, but it has helped us unquestionably in that regard. So I just want to flag those 3 for you. And then the general oversight is, when we talked public safety earlier, thank you for all the feedback. Thanks for the conversation. Issues around traffic enforcement, I think, are some really interesting challenging policy conversations and administrative ones. I struggle with resources going towards violent crime versus resources going towards traffic, just candidly. We're getting zero help in Helena in this regard as well. Other states, other communities are using technology and other ways to try to get people to be enforced. I just say these things to bring to your attention. I know you are aware of them, but those who may be watching, if you're really trying to fully look at engaging and making our community a safer place, our legislators are a part of that. And right now, though there's some strong support around the violent crime areas, I'm speaking in generalities, I don't think we're getting much support when it comes to a lot of other, there's a lot of stripping away of authority from you, from us. And frankly, I think when this session is over with, we're going to need to have some serious conversations of, okay, it is what it is. How do we best, lead our city, run our community based on whatever happens at the legislative level? So more to come. Like I said, the transmittal deadline, I think, is next week. So things will start thinning out after that. Sorry, I did have one other item, and that is Public Works asked. We did have this conversation at Budget and Finance, which is we do not need a budget amendment for this, but it's a flag for you. And it's one that the committee, thankfully, was supportive of Public Works in this area. We're going into our third season of not much hope that we're going to be able to hire seasonals. So, on the books, we have something in the neighborhood of 40-plus seasonal positions. For 2 full seasons, we've been able to hire single-digit seasonals. I've, in essence, authorized them to transfer wherever it makes sense, those seasonals to permanent, full-time. Obviously, it's going to be a much smaller number. It will require a little more resources to do it, but won't require a budget amendment, to see if this summer we can have a better impact on taking care of our properties and things of that nature. So just kind of a heads up. You won't see it as a budget amendment, but when we get into budget adoption, we will end up having that conversation. And the goal here is to not pull the rug out from underneath of me or them, which is for them to go and hire these and us to say, well, you're going to have to lay them all off because we don't agree with that. We can't guarantee them that won't happen. You haven't seen the budget yet. You don't know where we're at, but I just want to plant that seed with you and let you know that's where I've directed that we got to do something different because we're on our third season and there's not a lot of hope on the seasonal front. And we're learning from other cities who've shifted away from seasonals in a lot of these positions. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Before council discussion, Councilor Puritan?
Thank you. So I really wasn't going to say this, but I will now. So Chris, in your CA report, and then you just said it again, that our legislators are wanting to strip away our authority as elected officials. And I really beg to differ. Our legislators within Yellowstone County were voted in by vast majorities. And so I think they are speaking to a lot of the issues that our citizens within Yellowstone County have. A lot of it has to do with growth of government, and they are less government, less taxes individuals. So whenever, to me, it takes away not so much our authority as elected official, but it also takes away from administrative decisions that are made also. So I just think it's, these are our partners, I think, on a very substantial level. I think we have good relationships with all of our legislators. I don't always agree with everything they're putting before us. In fact, half of it, I'd say I don't understand it. But they are approachable, and I think they have reasons for what they do. And there are philosophical differences, on various levels. But I would hope that you would refrain from saying that they're stripping away our authority, because I think they're actually trying to help not only the citizens of Billings, but also the citizens of the state of Montana.
Okay. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll respectfully disagree, but I do have another question for you. It has nothing to do with that. Do you know are the police issued phones by the city, or is that personal phones that they bring to work?
So Councilmember Neese, some are and some aren't. It depends on the position that they're in. So like a lot of our detective division have city-issued phones, a lot of the specialized assignments, sergeants and above that nature.
Okay, and so it's actually, it has to do with the budget amendment in these MDTs, which I didn't know what they were until I looked them up and started realizing there's a lot of information out there about that. And I'm afraid that we're maybe investing in old technology when you have new technology out there that they're utilizing, cell phone technology and replacing the old antiquated laptops with cell phones and just displays. And I'm wondering if we've actually taken the time to look into this. I know it's been tested in some police departments for a number of years now in defining if that's a better way of technology moving forward instead of investing, $500,000 into this old technology that's moved to the newer technology that's going to maybe benefit the city and the officers better.
So Councilmember Neese, the answer to your question is yes, those things have been looked at, even on the side of the radios, car radio, portable radio, they've got push to talk on phones. So yes, that whole technology spectrum has been looked at, but, in the car, the MDT is this point is probably the best technology for the Billings Police Department, the way that dispatch uses it and the information that comes across there. A phone, size device might not be the best option for those things. And then they're also doing their report writing, things like that, on their MDTs, not just the dispatch portion.
I don't think you understand the way they're using the cell phone technology and MDTs. You may want to look up the technology, but it basically docks your phone to a full display like an MDT today, as well as it takes it right to their office, docks it, and they use it just like they use their computer today. So it really isn't any different than using an MDT today, other than the brains of it is a cell phone. And I think it would be worth looking into that technology instead of investing into something that's just, a big old laptop that sits in the car that maybe isn't the best use of our dollars to invest in.
Yeah, certainly we can look into it, but again, they do use them as laptops, for doing their reports, doing certain things like that. If I'm understanding it correctly, it's a phone similar to a Microsoft Surface. You just dock it and use the processor in it.
It's not. You take a look at it, and I'll send you some links to it so you can look into it.
Okay, council, anything of council discussion? Okay, public comment on non-agenda items. Anything not on our agenda? No. We're adjourned. Thank you. But you can come back.